Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Elizabeth Hawthorne, and I need to tell you what really happened in Dark Hollow that October. I've been a park ranger for 8 years now, and I've seen plenty of lost hikers, broken bones, and bad weather. But what I saw in those woods changed everything I thought I knew about the world. It was 1976, and the leaves were at their peak. October in Shenandoah is something special. The mountains look like they're on fire with all that red and gold. Tourists come from everywhere to see it. That's why we stay so busy this time of year. That's also when people get careless and end up lost. I was working search and rescue that weekend. My 2 boys, Tommy and Jake, were with me, 8 and 10 years old. Their father had them during the week now, since the divorce went through. Weekend visits at the ranger station weren't much fun for kids, but it was all I could manage. I was still trying to prove myself in this job. Not many women worked as rangers back then, and some of the old-timers made sure I knew it. Dale Morrison was my partner that day. He'd been working these mountains for 20 years, knew every trail and creek. Local folks trusted him. He grew up here, heard all the old stories from his grandmother. Most of the time, Dale stuck to facts and radio procedures. But sometimes, when we were alone on the trails, he'd mention things. Old Cherokee legends. Strange disappearances that never made the newspapers. Just mountain talk, he'd say with a shrug. But I noticed he never hiked certain areas alone. Dark Hollow Falls was one of those places. Beautiful spot. A 1,200-foot waterfall that draws photographers and families. The trail winds down through thick woods, gets steep near the bottom. Easy to slip, easy to get turned around if you don't know what you're doing. That's where the Thompson family was supposed to be hiking. The call came in around 4 in the afternoon. A family hadn't returned to their campsite. Parents in their 30s. Little girl named Jenny, 8 years old. Their campsite neighbors got worried when nobody came back by dinner time. Probably just lost track of time taking pictures, I told Dale as we loaded our packs. Standard stuff, first aid kit, rope, emergency blankets, radios. Happens all the time during peak season. Dale nodded, but he looked troubled. Dark Hollow, though, that's a tricky area. Easy to take a wrong turn. We drove out to the trailhead in my Ranger truck. The Thompsons' car was there in the parking area. A blue Ford station wagon with Ohio plates. That's when I first noticed something was off. The car was still running. All 4 doors stood wide open. The radio was playing softly. Some country song about going home. On the picnic table nearby, their lunch was spread out like they'd just stepped away for a minute. Sandwiches were still wrapped in foil. A thermos of coffee was still warm. "That's odd," Dale said, walking around the car. He touched the hood. "Engine's been running a while. Gas tank's nearly empty." I radioed base camp. "This is Ranger Hawthorne at Dark Hollow Trailhead. We've got an abandoned vehicle still running, belongs to missing Thompson family, requesting backup and K9 unit." The response crackled back through static. "Copy that, Hawthorne. Dogs are en route. ETA 20 minutes. While we waited, Dale and I walked the first part of the trail. The path was clear, well marked. Plenty of other hikers had been through recently. Lots of footprints in the soft dirt. That's when I noticed the silence. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. The forest was dead quiet except for our footsteps on the fallen leaves. In all my years in these mountains, I'd never heard anything like it. "Dale," I said, stopping, "you hear that?" And he paused, listening. "Hear what?" "Exactly. Nothing. Where are all the animals?" Dale's face went pale. He looked around at the empty trees, then back at me. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked scared. "Maybe we should wait for the dogs," he said. The K9 unit arrived just as the sun started getting low. Officer Martinez and his German Shepherd, Rex, had worked with us before. Good team. Rex could track a scent through anything. But when we let Rex smell Jenny Thompson's jacket from their car, something strange happened. The dog whined and backed away. He kept looking up at the trees, ears flat against his head. "That's not like him," Martinez said, frowning. "Rex, what's wrong, boy?" The dog wouldn't go near the trail. Every time Martinez tried to lead him toward the path, Rex would plant his feet and refuse to move. "I've never seen him act like this," Martinez said. "It's like he's afraid of something." Dale and I exchanged looks. "We'll go on foot," I said. "You stay here with the car and radio. Keep trying to reach them on the emergency frequency." Dale pulled out his compass as we started down the trail. I watched him check it twice, shake it, then check it again. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Needle's spinning," he said, showing me. The compass needle was moving in slow circles, never settling on true north. Must be some kind of mineral deposit around here throwing it off. I tried my GPS unit. The screen kept flickering between different readings, sometimes showing we were miles from where we actually stood, sometimes showing nothing at all. "Equipment failure," I muttered. "Great timing." We followed the trail for about half a mile. The path was clear, easy to follow. Then Dale stopped suddenly and pointed at the ground. "Look at this." 3 sets of footprints were clear in a muddy patch, 2 adults wearing hiking boots, 1 small child in sneakers. The prints were fresh, made within the last few hours. We followed the tracks for another 100 yards. Then something impossible happened. The child's footprints just stopped. Not like she stepped off the trail or onto rocks. The prints just ended in the middle of the path, as if Jenny Thompson had vanished into thin air. "That's not possible," I said, kneeling down to look closer. The adult prints kept going, but the child's tracks ended mid-step. Her left foot had made a clear impression. Where her right foot should have landed, there was nothing but smooth dirt. Dale was looking around nervously. "Maybe she climbed on her father's back." I studied the adult prints. They didn't get any deeper, like they would if someone was carrying extra weight. And they were still evenly spaced, not the shorter, more careful steps you'd take with a child on your shoulders. "Dale," I said quietly, "this doesn't make sense." That's when we heard the voices, children laughing, high, clear voices echoing through the trees, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, above us, behind us, all around us. "Hello?" I called out. "Jenny, can you hear me?" The laughter stopped instantly. Then, after a moment of dead silence, we heard a little girl's voice calling, "Mommy? Daddy? Where are you?" It was coming from somewhere ahead of us, down toward the falls. "Jenny," I shouted, "stay where you are. We're coming to get you." Dale grabbed my arm. "Elizabeth, wait." "What?" "She's down there. She needs help." "Listen," he said. The voice called again. "Mommy? Daddy? Where are you?" It was exactly the same. Same tone, same words, like a recording being played over and over. A chill ran down my spine. That's not right. Dale was already backing up the trail. "We need to get out of here, now. We can't leave a lost child." "That's not a child," Dale said firmly. "That's something else." Before I could argue, we heard more voices. A whole group of children, laughing and calling out. But the voices were wrong somehow, too clear, too perfect. And they were, coming from impossible places, some from high up in the trees, others from beneath the ground. My radio crackled to life. Martinez's voice came through, filled with static. "Ranger, Hawthorne, do you copy?" I grabbed the radio. "This is Hawthorne. We're about a mile down the trail. We can hear what sounds like children, but—" The radio cut out with a burst of noise. When it cleared up, I could hear something else mixed in with the static. Children singing. A lullaby in a language I didn't recognize. "Dale, we need to find those parents. They might be hurt." Dale was looking up at the trees, where the singing seemed to be coming from. "The Cherokee have stories about this place," he said quietly. "My grandmother told me. Children who went missing during the Trail of Tears. She said they never left." "That's just old stories." "Is it?" Dale pointed at the footprints that ended in empty air. "You got a better explanation for this?" The singing got louder. More voices joined in. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. We found the Thompson parents 20 minutes later at the base of the waterfall. They were lying side by side on the rocks, both looking up at the sky. Their necks were broken, but there were no signs of a fall, no scrapes or bruises. They looked almost peaceful, like they'd just laid down to watch the clouds. Jenny was nowhere to be found. I checked both bodies for a pulse, knowing I wouldn't find one. How did they get down here? This isn't even on the trail. Dale was standing perfectly still, listening. The children's voices had stopped singing. Now they were whispering. Dozens of them, all around us. "We need to leave," Dale said. "Right now. We can't leave without Jenny." "Look around, Elizabeth. Really look." I did. And that's when I saw them. Children standing between the trees. Pale children in old-fashioned clothes, long dresses and short pants, like something from 50 years ago. They stood perfectly still, watching us. As soon as I looked directly at one, it would fade away like smoke. "They're not real," I whispered. "Tell that to the Thompson parents," Dale said. We hiked back up to the parking area as fast as we could. Martinez was waiting by the cars with Rex, who was still acting strange. The dog wouldn't stop whining and pacing. I radioed for backup. Coroner, sheriff's department, more rangers. While we waited, Dale told me more about the Cherokee legends. This whole area was sacred to them, he said. Children would come here for ceremonies, rites of passage. Then in 1838, the government forced them out. Trail of Tears. Thousands died on the march west. What does that have to do with what we saw down there? My grandmother called them Nunahi, spirit people. She said the children who died along the trail came back here to the place they remembered as safe. But they're still children, still lonely. So they call to living children, try to get them to stay and play. I wanted to dismiss it as folklore, but I kept thinking about Jenny Thompson's footprints ending in nothing. About her parents lying peacefully with broken necks, about the voices in the trees. "Even if that's true," I said, "we still have to find Jenny. She's 8 years old." Dale nodded grimly. "I know, but we need to be careful. The Nunahi are strongest at dusk and dawn, and they're drawn to children who are sad or lonely." That hit me like a punch to the stomach. My own boys were back at the ranger station, probably bored and missing their father. If these spirits really did target children, I grabbed my radio. "Base camp, this is Ranger Hawthorne. I need someone to check on my boys. They're at the station." Static. Then, "Copy that, Hawthorne. Stand by." The wait felt like forever. Finally, "Your boys are fine. They're in the break room doing homework." I breathed a sigh of relief. But something in the radio operator's voice sounded off. "Are you sure? Can you put Tommy on the radio?" More. Static. Then a child's voice came through. "Hi, Mom. We're okay. We're just playing with some new friends." My blood went cold. Tommy never called me Mom on the radio. He always said, "Hey, Ranger Hawthorne," because he thought it was funny. And he'd said they were playing with friends. But there were no other children at the station. "Martinez," I said urgently, "I need you to drive back to base camp. Now, check on my boys." "What about the search?" "Just go." Martinez loaded Rex into his truck and drove off. Dale and I stood alone in the parking lot as darkness started falling. "They're after your children now," Dale said quietly. "That's impossible. They're miles away. Distance doesn't matter to spirits. Your boys heard the calling just like Jenny did. That's why they think they're playing with friends." I tried the radio again, but got nothing but static mixed with children's laughter. "We have to go back," I said. "Get my truck, drive to the station. It might be too late. If the Nunahi have called them..." "Don't say that." I was already heading for my truck. "I won't lose my children." Dale caught up with me. "If we're going to do this, we need help, real help." "What kind of help?" "There's an old Cherokee man, John Crowfeather. Lives about 10 miles from here. His grandfather was a medicine man. He might know how to deal with this. I wanted to argue, to stick with regular procedures. But regular procedures don't work when children's footprints vanish into thin air. Fine, I said. But we make it fast. John Crowfeather lived in a small cabin off a dirt road. He was probably 80 years old with long white hair and hands like old leather. When we explained what was happening, he just nodded like he'd been expecting us. The hungry children, he said simply. They wake up when the leaves turn, looking for playmates. Can you stop them? I asked. Cannot stop them, can only bargain with them. He went into his cabin and came back with a small leather pouch. Tobacco, sacred to my people. Offer it to them. Show respect. They might listen, might. The old man's eyes were sad. They are children who died far from home, in pain and fear. They have been lonely for a very long time. Sometimes they listen. Sometimes they are too hungry for company. I took the pouch. What if they don't listen? Then you must choose, your children or theirs. That's not a choice. For the Nunahai, it is the only choice they understand. On the drive back to the ranger station, Dale was quiet. Finally, he said, Elizabeth, there's something else. The children who get taken, they don't always stay children. Time works differently for the Nunahai. A few hours with them can be years in their world. What are you saying? I'm saying even if we get your boys back, they might not be the same. I pressed harder on the gas pedal. The mountain roads were dark and winding, but I knew them by heart. When we reached the ranger station, all the lights were on. I could see people moving around inside, other rangers who'd come in for the emergency. But I could also hear something else. Children singing, the same Cherokee lullaby we'd heard down in the hollow. I ran into the station with Dale right behind me. 3 other rangers were standing in the main room looking confused and worried. Where are my boys? I demanded. Ranger Collins pointed toward the break room. They're in there. Been singing for the last hour. Won't answer when we talk to them. I pushed past him and looked through the break room window. Tommy and Jake were sitting at the table, but they weren't alone. A dozen other children sat with them. Pale children in old-fashioned clothes. The ghost children from the hollow. My boys were singing along with them, but their eyes were empty, like they were sleepwalking. How long have they been like this? Dale asked. Since about sunset, Collins said. They just started singing all of a sudden, in some foreign language. I tried to open the break room door. It wouldn't budge. It's not locked, Collins said. We checked, it just won't open. Dale pulled out the tobacco pouch John Crowfeather had given me. Elizabeth, you need to offer this to them. Show respect. Ask for your children back. I took the pouch and approached the window. The spirit children all turned to look at me at once. Their eyes were like black holes. I know who you are, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You're Cherokee children. You died far from home. The singing stopped. One of the spirit children, a little girl about Jenny Thompson's age, stepped forward. She was wearing a torn blue dress and had flowers in her hair. We are lonely, she said, though her mouth didn't move. The voice came from everywhere at once. We want friends to play with us. I understand, I said. But these are my children. Please let them go. They are happy with us. We teach them our songs, our games. They will never be sad again. They belong in this world, with me. The spirit girl tilted her head. Do they? You are always working, always angry. Their father does not want them. They are lonely too. The words hit home because they were partly true. Since the divorce, I had been working too much, trying to prove myself, and my boys were caught in the middle. Maybe that's true, I said, but I love them, and I'll do better. Love is not enough. We loved our families too, but we still died cold and hungry on the long walk. I held up the tobacco pouch. This is for you. A gift of respect from your people who are still here. The spirit children murmured among themselves in Cherokee. The little girl looked at the tobacco with hungry eyes. It has been so long since anyone remembered us, she said. John Crowfeather remembers. Others remember. But you can't take living children. It's not right. Not right? The spirit girl's voice turned angry. Was it right when the soldiers came? Was it right when they made us walk in winter with no food? Was it right when they buried us in unmarked graves far from home? No, I said honestly. It wasn't right. What happened to you was terrible, but taking my children won't fix that. Behind the spirit girl, I could see more Cherokee children appearing. Dozens of them filling the break room. Boys and girls of all ages, all wearing the clothes they died in over a century ago. We are so tired of being alone, the spirit girl said. Your children hear our songs. They want to stay. I looked at Tommy and Jake. They were still singing, but tears were running down their faces. Whatever the spirits were showing them, it was making them sad. Look at them, I said. Really look. They're crying. They're not happy. They miss their father. They miss their friends. They miss being alive. The spirit girl looked at my boys more carefully. For the first time, her expression softened. You would trade places with them? She asked suddenly. Come with us instead? An adult spirit is much stronger than a child. We could use your strength. Dale grabbed my arm. Elizabeth, don't. But I understood now. This was the choice John Crow Feather had warned me about. My children or theirs, my life or my boys' lives. Yes, I said. I'll come with you. But you have to promise to let all the living children go. Not just mine. Jenny Thompson, too. All of them. The spirit children whispered among themselves again. Finally, the little girl nodded. We accept your trade. One strong spirit for all the living children. Wait, Dale said. He stepped forward. Take me instead. I'm older. I know these mountains better. I'll be more useful to you. The spirit girl studied him. You are not Cherokee. No, but I've lived here all my life. My grandmother told me your stories. I've always respected your people. Dale? No, I said. You have family too. My kids are grown, he said quietly. Your boys need their mother. The spirit girl looked back and forth between you. So finally, she said, the old man who gave you tobacco, he taught you both respect. Very well, we will take the older ranger. But the mother must promise to honor our memory, tell others about us. Make sure we are not forgotten again. I wanted to argue, to find another way, but I could see Dale had made up his mind. I promise, I said. Dale smiled sadly. Take care of those boys, Elizabeth. And remember, some places in these mountains are sacred. Keep them that way. The spirit girl touched Dale's hand. Instantly, he began to fade, becoming transparent like the ghost children. Tell my family I'm sorry, he said. Then he was gone. The break room door swung open. My boys stumbled out, confused and scared. The spirit children had vanished, but I could still hear their voices fading into the distance, singing their Cherokee lullaby. Tommy and Jake ran to me, and I held them tight. Mom, Tommy said in a small voice. We had the strangest dream. They found Jenny Thompson 3 days later, walking out of the woods near Dark Hollow. She was alive and unharmed, but something had changed. She spoke fluent Cherokee now, though she'd never heard the language before. And she drew pictures, dozens of them, all showing the same thing. Cherokee children holding hands in a circle, dancing around a fire. The official report said the Thompson parents died from a hiking accident, hypothermia and disorientation from being lost overnight. Then a fatal fall. The investigators found no evidence of anything supernatural. They never found Dale's body. I requested a transfer to desk duty after that. Couldn't handle being out in the woods anymore, especially around Dark Hollow. Some of the other rangers thought I'd lost my nerve after losing my partner. Maybe they were right. But I kept my promise to the spirit children. I talked to local schools about Cherokee history. I made sure Dark Hollow was closed to hikers during peak season, October through November, when the Nunahai are strongest. The official reason was dangerous trail conditions, but the real reason was to protect other families from what happened to the Thompsons. My boys recovered mostly. They don't remember much about that night, just strange dreams about playing with other children and learning old songs. But sometimes, especially in autumn, I catch them humming Cherokee melodies they shouldn't know. Jenny Thompson's parents took her to specialists, trying to understand how she'd learned a new language overnight. The doctors had theories about trauma and memory, but none of them could explain how an 8-year-old from Ohio could suddenly speak better Cherokee than most native speakers. John Crowfeather died the following spring. At his funeral, people said they heard children singing in the woods nearby, Cherokee voices welcoming him home. I still work for the Park Service, but now I focus on cultural preservation and education, making sure people understand that these mountains hold more than just scenic views. They hold the memories of the people who lived here first, including the children who never made it home. Every October, when the leaves turn and the tourists come to see the colors, I think about Dale, about his choice to trade his life for children he'd never met, about the Cherokee children who are still out there, still lonely, still calling to anyone who will listen. And sometimes, late at night when the wind blows through the trees just right, I swear I can hear them singing. Dark Hollow is still closed during autumn months. The signs say it's for visitor safety, and that's partly true. But the real reason is simpler. Some places are sacred. Some stories need to be remembered, and some spirits should be left in peace. My boys are grown now, with children of their own. They live in the city, far from these mountains. But last October, my grandson came to visit. He's 8 years old, about the same age Tommy was that night. On his second day here, I caught him humming a Cherokee lullaby. He said he learned it from some kids he met in his dreams. I think it's time to have a talk with John Crowfeather's grandson, because the Nunahai are still out there, still calling to lonely children. And autumn is coming again. The hungry children are waking up. My name is Marcus Sullivan, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 12 years. That's long enough to know these mountains better than most folks know their own backyards. Long enough to hear every ghost story, every tall tale, every piece of nonsense the old-timers like to tell tourists around campfires. But it's also long enough to know when something's really wrong. I grew up here, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. My grandfather used to run moonshine through these hills back in the 20s, and he knew every hidden path, every secret cave, every place where a man could disappear if he needed to. Some of that knowledge got passed down to me, even though I chose the law instead of breaking it. The Devil's Backbone Ridge sits right on the Tennessee-North Carolina border, a nasty stretch of rocky spine that's claimed more hikers than any other part of the park. Folks slip on the wet rocks near Cataract Falls. They get turned around in the fog and walk right off a cliff. Every year we pull at least 3 or 4 bodies out of those woods. It's just a dangerous place, I always told people. Nothing supernatural about it, just steep drops and slippery stones. That was before August of 1982, before 3 college kids went missing, and I learned that some of the old stories might not be stories at all. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 geology students from the University of Tennessee had been mapping caves along the Devil's Backbone for their research project. Their professor expected them back on Monday. When they didn't show up, he called us. They're good kids, Professor Williams told me over the radio. Smart, careful, experienced cavers. They had all the right equipment, plenty of food and water. Something's wrong. I grabbed my pack and headed out with Amy Chen, a junior ranger who'd just transferred in from Colorado. And she was young, maybe 25, with a background in cave rescue that made her valuable on calls like this. The hike to their last known campsite took us 2 hours through thick forest and up some of the steepest trails in the park. The summer had been dry and the leaves crunched under our boots like broken glass. Storm clouds were building to the west, the first rain we'd seen in weeks. We found their camp just after noon, and right away I knew something was off. The 3 tents were still standing, perfectly neat and organized. Their geological equipment was still running, humming quietly as it recorded data. Backpacks sat exactly where they should be. A cold camp stove held the remains of what looked like breakfast from 2 days ago. But no people. No signs of a struggle. No notes left behind. "This doesn't make sense," Amy said, kneeling next to one of the tents. "All their personal stuff is here. Wallets, car keys, even their cell phones." I walked the perimeter of the camp, looking for tracks, for any sign of where they might have gone. These kids had been mapping caves, so they must have been exploring the limestone caverns that honeycombed the ridge. But when I checked the 3 main cave entrances I knew about, I found something that made my blood run cold. All 3 caves had been sealed shut with rocks. Not just blocked, sealed from the inside, with stones fitted together so perfectly that you'd need tools to pull them apart. "Amy," I called, "come look at this." She jogged over and stared at the blocked cave mouth. "That's impossible. You can't seal a cave from inside unless you never plan to come back out," I finished. We spent the rest of the afternoon searching, calling their names, checking every other cave entrance we could find. The same story everywhere, sealed tight with rocks that looked like they'd been placed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. As the sun started to set, we made camp near the missing students' site. Amy set up our radio equipment while I gathered firewood. The storm clouds were getting closer, and I could smell rain in the air. That's when we heard the first voice. It was muffled, distant, like someone calling from deep underground. We both froze, listening hard. "Help, please." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing up from the rocks beneath our feet. Amy grabbed her flashlight and started toward the sealed caves. "Someone's down there." But as we got closer to the blocked entrances, the voice faded away. We waited, listening, but heard nothing except wind in the trees and the rumble of approaching thunder. "Could be acoustic tricks," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. "Sound carries weird in limestone country." Amy nodded, but I could see she wasn't buying it any more than I was. We settled in for the night, taking turns on watch. During my shift, around 3 a.m, I heard something that made me question everything I thought I knew about these mountains. Marching. The steady tramp of boots on stone, echoing up from deep underground. And voices. Not calls for help, but sharp military commands. "Forward! March! Column! Halt! Present arms!" The voices were clear as day, but they sounded old somehow, formal, like something from a history book. I didn't wake Amy. I sat there listening until dawn, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. By morning, the voices had stopped, but I'd made up my mind about one thing. We were going into those caves. Amy wasn't happy about my decision to break into the sealed caves. "This goes against every safety protocol," she said as we worked to pull stones away from the largest entrance. "We should call for backup, get a full cave rescue team up here." "Those kids have been missing for 3 days," I told her. "We don't have time to wait for backup." The truth was, I didn't want to explain to a rescue team why the caves had been sealed from inside. I didn't want to tell them about the voices I'd heard in the night. Some things are better handled quietly, at least until you understand what you're dealing with. It took us 2 hours to clear the entrance enough for a person to squeeze through. The opening led down into darkness, a narrow passage that curved away into the mountain. Our helmet lights barely penetrated the blackness ahead. "I'll go first," I said. "You stay close behind, and if anything feels wrong, we get out fast." The passage was tight for the first 50 feet, then opened into a larger chamber. Our lights revealed limestone walls carved by centuries of water, and passages leading off in 3 directions. The air was cool and damp, with a strange metallic smell I couldn't identify. "Look at this," Amy whispered, pointing her light at the wall near the entrance. Scratched into the stone were initials and dates. JB 1863, TW 1863, PK 1863. Dozens of them, all from the same year. "Civil War era," I said. "Granddad used to tell stories about Confederate deserters hiding in these caves." We chose the widest passage and followed it deeper into the mountain. The tunnel sloped downward, and I could hear the distant sound of running water. Our footsteps echoed strangely, like there were more than 2 people walking. After maybe 10 minutes, we came to another chamber, this one much larger. Amy swept her light across the ceiling and walls, mapping the space. "Jesus," she breathed. The chamber was full of bones. Human skeletons lay scattered across the floor, some still in the rotted remains of gray uniforms. Rusty rifles leaned against the walls. A Confederate battle flag hung in tatters from a wooden pole. "This is a mass grave," I said, keeping my voice low. Something about the place demanded quiet. "Deserters, maybe. Someone executed them down here." Amy was examining one of the skeletons near the far wall. "Marcus, look at this skull. Bullet hole right through the back. These men were shot execution style." I played my light over more of the remains. Same story everywhere. Bullet, holes in skulls, bones scattered like the bodies had been left where they fell. 40, maybe 50 dead men. "We need to document this," Amy said, pulling out her camera. "This is a significant historical find." But as she raised the camera, we both heard something that made us freeze. Footsteps. Heavy boots on stone, coming from the passage we'd just used. "Someone followed us down," Amy whispered. The footsteps were getting closer, echoing through the tunnels with a steady military rhythm. Left, right, perfectly timed, like a soldier on parade. I drew my service weapon and moved toward the chamber entrance, Amy right behind me. Our lights probed the darkness of the approaching tunnel. The footsteps stopped. We waited, hardly breathing, but heard nothing. No voices, no movement, just the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. "Hello?" I called out. "Park Service, identify yourself." My voice echoed through the caves and faded to silence. No answer. "Maybe it was just echoes," Amy suggested, but her voice shook a little. We waited another few minutes, then decided to continue deeper into the cave system. The passage on the far side of the bone chamber led to a series of smaller rooms, each one carved with more initials and dates from 1863. In the third room, we found the missing students. They were huddled together in a corner, and for a moment I thought they were just sleeping. Then Amy's light hit their faces, and I saw the truth. All three had been shot through the head with what looked like musket balls. Large, round holes punched through their skulls, just like the Civil War skeletons in the other chamber. But these kids had been dead for maybe 2 days. The blood was still fresh. "That's impossible," Amy whispered. "Nobody uses muskets anymore. How could—" A voice cut through the darkness behind us, cold and commanding. "You are trespassing on a military burial ground." We spun around, lights dancing wildly. A figure stood in the passage we'd just come through, tall, wearing a gray Confederate uniform that looked like it had just been pressed. His face was pale as bone, and his eyes were holes of absolute darkness. "I am Colonel Joshua Gray, 1st Tennessee Infantry," the figure said. "These men died as cowards and deserters. Their bones are under my protection." Amy's camera flashed as she took a picture. The figure didn't show up in the bright light. For a split second, we saw nothing but empty tunnel. Then the darkness returned, and he was there again. "You will leave this place immediately," Colonel Gray said, "or you will join them." He raised something in his right hand, an old percussion rifle, the kind that fired musket balls. We ran. Racing through the tunnels, our lights bouncing crazily off the walls, we could hear him behind us. Not running, marching with that same steady military pace, but somehow keeping up with our panic-driven sprint. "Left, right, his voice echoed after us. "Company, forward march!" We made it back to the main chamber where we'd found the Civil War skeletons. But Colonel Gray was waiting for us, not behind us anymore. Ahead of us, standing among the bones of his executed men, like he'd never moved at all. "You cannot leave," he said calmly. "You have seen too much. You know where they are buried." Amy grabbed my arm. "The other passage," she whispered. "The one we didn't take." We backed away from Gray toward the tunnel entrance, but he raised his rifle and pointed it directly at my chest. "I have been carrying out my orders for 119 years, he said. "Deserters will be executed. Those who aid deserters will be executed. Those who disturb the execution ground will be executed." The rifle fired with a boom that shook the entire chateau. Sergeant Ember, I dove sideways, pulling Amy with me, and the musket ball shattered limestone where my head had been a second before. We scrambled into the side passage as Gray began reloading his weapon with practiced efficiency. The tunnel was smaller than the others, barely wide enough for one person. We crawled on hands and knees, rocks scraping our backs. Behind us, I could hear Gray's voice. "Corporal Adams, seal the main entrance. Private Walsh, guard the eastern tunnel. No one escapes a military execution." Other voices answered him. Dead voices from the bone chamber. "Yes, sir." "Understood, sir." "Orders received." The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one with 3 passages leading off in different directions. Amy chose the middle one without hesitation, and we found ourselves crawling through an even tighter space. "There has to be another way out," she panted. "Caves this big always have multiple entrances." "Not if Gray's men are sealing them all," I said. We emerged into a small room with smooth walls and a pool of dark water in the center. The only other exit was a hole in the floor, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. "Down there," Amy said. "It's our only choice." I went first, dropping through the hole into a narrow passage that slanted sharply downward. The air was getting thinner, and I could hear water moving somewhere below us. The passage ended at an underground river, maybe 3 feet deep and fast-moving. Our lights showed it disappearing into a low tunnel that was half filled with water. "We'll have to swim," Amy said. "Hold our breath and hope it opens up somewhere ahead." Before I could answer, we heard voices echoing down from the passage above us. Gray's men, getting closer. "Search every tunnel," Gray commanded. "Find them and bring them back for execution." Amy and I looked at each other. We both knew we didn't have a choice. We waded into the underground river and took deep breaths. The water was shockingly cold, and the current was stronger than it looked. I went under and let the flow carry me into the flooded tunnel, feeling along the ceiling with my hands. My lungs were already burning, and I hadn't gone 20 feet. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, curving left, then right, always slanting downward. Just when I thought I'd have to breathe water or die, my head broke the surface. I was in another chamber, this one filled waist deep with the underground river. Amy surfaced beside me a moment later, gasping and coughing. "Where are we?" she asked. Our light showed a large cave with dozens of passages leading off in all directions. This was clearly a main junction in the cave system, a central hub that connected to tunnels throughout the mountain, and we weren't alone. Confederate soldiers stood guard at every tunnel entrance. Some wore the same gray uniforms as Gray. Others were in the ragged clothes of deserters. All of them were pale as corpses, with those same black holes for eyes. "Colonel Gray will be pleased," one of them said. "Fresh deserters for execution." They moved toward us through the water, not walking but gliding, their feet barely touching the rocky bottom. I counted at least 20 of them, maybe more in the shadows. "We're not deserters," I said, raising my hands. "We're park rangers. We're just looking for missing people." "Everyone says that," another ghost soldier replied, "right before we shoot them." Amy suddenly grabbed my arm and pointed upward. "Look!" Above our heads, carved into the chamber ceiling, were names and dates. But these weren't from 1863. They were recent. Mike Torres, 1978. Sarah Jenkins, 1980. Bobby Clark, 1981. Every hiker who'd gone missing on Devil's Backbone in the last 10 years. They'd all ended up here, in Gray's execution chamber. "You see," one of the soldiers said, "we have been busy. Colonel Gray maintains discipline, even in death." The ghost soldiers were almost within reach now, raising their rifles. Could see musket balls loaded in the barrels, somehow solid and real, despite everything else being supernatural. That's when Amy did something I'll never forget. She stepped in front of me and addressed the lead soldier directly. "I challenge Colonel Gray's authority," she said in a clear, strong voice. "I demand to speak with your commanding officer." The soldiers stopped moving. They looked at each other uncertainly. "Military protocol," Amy continued. "Any civilian has the right to address charges before a military tribunal. I invoke that right." I stared at her. Where was she getting this from? "The colonel will decide," the lead soldier said finally. He raised a ghostly bugle to his lips and blew 3 sharp notes that echoed throughout the cave system. Within minutes, Colonel Gray appeared, marching down one of the side tunnels with perfect military bearing. His boots splashed through the water without making a sound. "Who dares challenge my authority?" he demanded. Amy stepped forward. "I do. Ranger Amy Chen, United States Park Service. You are operating outside your jurisdiction, Colonel. This is federal land, not Confederate territory." Gray's eyes, those black holes in his pale face, fixed on her with terrible intensity. "I carry out orders given to me by General Braxton Bragg in 1863, he said. "Deserters will be executed. My orders have not been countermanded." "Your war ended in 1865, Amy replied. "Your general is dead. Your Confederacy is gone. You have no authority here." For a moment, I thought she'd convinced him. Gray's expression seemed uncertain, almost confused. Then his face hardened again. "I know what I am," he said. "I know my duty. You will be executed at dawn." He turned to his men. "Put them in the deserters' hole. Standard execution tomorrow, sunrise." The deserters' hole was exactly what it sounded like. A pit carved into the cave floor, about 8 feet deep and 6 feet across. They threw us down there and posted guards at the rim. "Brilliant strategy," I told Amy as we sat in the muddy bottom. "Really worked out, Sal." "I bought us time," she said. "And I learned something important. He's not just a ghost. He's stuck in 1863. He doesn't understand that his war is over." I looked up at the ghost soldiers standing guard above us. "So how does that help us?" "I'm working on it." We spent the night in the pit, listening to Gray's men tell stories about the people they'd executed over the years. Hikers, campers, researchers. Anyone who'd stumbled onto their burial ground and couldn't find a way out. "The colonel is very thorough," one soldier explained to us. "He makes sure the bodies are never found. Can't have the living world learning about our little war." As dawn approached, though we couldn't see sunlight this deep underground, the soldiers dragged us out of the pit and marched us to a wide chamber I hadn't seen before. This one had smooth walls and a level floor, a perfect execution ground. Colonel Gray stood at the far end with his rifle at ready arms. 20 ghost soldiers formed a firing line, their muskets aimed at our chests. "Any last words?" Gray asked formally. Amy stepped forward again. "Colonel, before you carry out this execution, I have information about your men." Gray's expression didn't change, but he lowered his rifle slightly. "Speak." "Your soldiers weren't deserters," Amy said. "They were heroes." The ghost soldiers stirred restlessly. Even Gray seemed taken aback. "Explain yourself," he demanded. Amy pointed to the bone chamber we'd seen earlier. "Those men didn't run from battle, Colonel. They ran from you. You were executing your own soldiers for refusing illegal orders." "That is a lie." "Check your own records," Amy continued. 1863, 1st Tennessee Infantry. You were ordered to execute Confederate deserters, but you started killing anyone who questioned your methods. Your own men turned against you because you'd become a war criminal." Gray's pale face twisted with rage. "I followed orders. I maintained discipline." "You became a monster," Amy said quietly, "and your own soldiers died trying to stop you." For a moment, the chamber was completely silent. Then Gray raised his rifle and aimed it directly at Amy's heart. "Execute the prisoners!" he screamed. 20 muskets fired at once, but instead of hitting us, the musket balls struck Colonel Gray. His own men had turned their weapons on him, just like they had 119 years ago. Gray staggered backward, looking down at the holes in his gray uniform. You cannot. I am your commanding officer." "Not anymore," said the soldier who'd been guarding us. His voice sounded different now, warmer, more human. "We remember now. We remember what you really were." Gray fell to his knees, then collapsed forward onto the stone floor. His body began to fade, becoming transparent, then nothing at all. The other ghost soldiers started to fade as well, but more peacefully. They looked relieved, like men who'd finally been allowed to lay down their weapons after a very long war. "Thank you," their leader said to Amy. "We can rest now." And then we were alone in the darkness. The way out was easier than I'd expected. With Gray gone, the sealed cave entrances opened by themselves. We found our way back to the surface just as the sun was coming up over the Devil's Backbone Ridge. Amy was quiet during the hike back to our vehicles. When we reached the trailhead, she finally spoke. "How did you know about military protocol?" I asked her. She smiled sadly. "My grandfather was a military historian. He told me stories about Civil War courts-martial, about officers who went too far and had to be stopped by their own men. And the part about Gray being a war criminal. I made that up," she admitted. "But it felt true, you know, the way his soldiers reacted when I said it." We filed our report with the Park Service, listing the missing students as victims of a cave-in caused by the recent drought. The geological survey equipment at their campsite had recorded unusual seismic activity around the time they disappeared. Nobody questioned our story. Nobody wanted to dig too deep into what had happened in those caves. That was 40 years ago, and I'm an old man now. I left the Park Service 6 months after the Devil's Backbone incident and became a local historian, documenting Civil War sites throughout the Smoky Mountains. Amy transferred back to Colorado and never spoke publicly about what we experienced. She sent me Christmas cards for a few years, then we lost touch. I hope she found peace. The caves along Devil's Backbone remain sealed, officially due to geological instability. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is dark, locals report hearing military commands echoing up from deep underground. Different commands now, though. Not Gray's harsh execution orders, but the gentler voices of soldiers finally allowed to rest. "Stand down, men. War's over. You can go home now." I've spent decades researching what really happened to Colonel Joshua Gray and the 1st Tennessee Infantry. The official records are spotty, but I found enough evidence to convince me that Amy was right. Gray had been relieved of command in late 1863 for conduct unbecoming an officer. His own men had filed complaints about unnecessary executions and brutal discipline. He disappeared from the official record after that, but local stories from the time mention a mad colonel who lived in caves and continued executing deserters long after his authority had been revoked. The stories say his own soldiers finally cornered him in those caves and put an end to his reign of terror. They all died down there together. Gray, his victims, and the men who stopped him. And for 119 years, Gray's obsession with duty and discipline kept them all trapped, replaying the same conflict over and over. But Amy broke that cycle. She reminded the other soldiers who the PMO really were and gave them permission to stop following a madman's orders. I still visit the Devil's Backbone Ridge sometimes, especially on clear autumn mornings when the leaves are turning and the mountains look like they're on fire. The sealed cave entrances are still there, covered now with warning signs and steel grates. But the mountains feel different now, peaceful, like something that was broken has finally been healed. I never saw another ghost after that night in the caves, and I never want to. Some mysteries are better left solved, some wars are better left finished. The Devil's Backbone got its name from all the good people who died on that ridge over the years. But I think now it might earn a new name. Maybe something that honors the soldiers who finally found their way home and the young ranger who showed them the path. Amy Chen Ridge has a nice sound to it, don't you think? Sometimes the dead just need someone to tell them it's okay to stop fighting. Sometimes that's all any of us need. My name is Rebecca Stone, and I've been a park ranger for 10 years. I work in the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky, where my job is to protect old historical sites from people who want to damage them or build on them. I have a degree in anthropology, which means I study how people lived long ago. Most folks think my work is boring, but I love it. These old places have stories to tell. My family has lived in Kentucky for over 200 years. My great-great-grandmother used to tell stories about the early settlers and the strange things that happened in these mountains. I never believed most of those stories. I'm a scientist. I believe in facts, not ghost tales. But that changed in September 1985. It was the new moon that month, which meant the nights were darker than usual. The weather was weird too. way too warm for late September, and thick fog rolled through the mountains every morning. I should have known something was wrong when the animals started acting strange. The birds were too quiet, and I hadn't seen a deer in 3 days. I got the call on a Tuesday morning. A team of college students from the university had gone missing. They were archaeology students, studying old religious communities from the 1800s. Their professor, Dr. Martin Cross, was worried sick. The students had been working in a place called Moonless Hollow, digging up the ruins of an old settlement. They were supposed to check in every day, Dr. Cross told me over the phone. His voice shook. No one's heard from them in 4 days. Moonless Hollow was deep in the forest, about 20 miles from the nearest road. You had to hike for hours to get there. The place had a dark history. Back in 1847, a religious group had built a small town there. They called themselves the Children of the Final Dawn. 47 people lived there, men, women, and children. Then one day, they all disappeared. Every single person. No bodies were ever found. The official record said they probably died from disease or starvation, but the local people always whispered about something else. Something that didn't make sense. I didn't believe in ghost stories, but missing college kids were real. That was my job. Dr. Cross met me at the forest entrance the next morning. He was a thin man in his 50s with gray hair and nervous eyes. He carried a heavy backpack full of old books and papers. I've been studying these religious communities for 20 years, he said as we started hiking. The Children of the Final Dawn were different from the others. They believed God spoke directly to their leader, a man named Ezekiel Thorne. They thought the world was about to end, and only they would be saved. The trail was steep and difficult. Old trees blocked out most of the sunlight, making everything feel dim and cold even though it was warm outside. After 3 hours of walking, we reached the top of a ridge. There, Dr. Cross pointed down into a deep valley. Moonless Hollow. I looked down and felt my stomach twist. The valley was perfectly round, like a giant bowl carved into the earth. At the bottom, I could see old wooden buildings. They looked too good to be real. After 140 years, they should have been rotted piles of wood. Instead, they looked like someone had just built them. "That's impossible," I whispered. Dr. Cross nodded. That's what the students said, too. We climbed down into the valley as the sun started to set. The closer we got to the old buildings, the more wrong everything felt. The trees grew in strange patterns, bending away from certain spots like they were afraid to touch the ground. The air smelled sweet and rotten at the same time. The students had set up their camp near what looked like the main street of the old town. Their tents were still there, alow, and with their digging tools and equipment. Everything was neat and organized, like they had just stepped away for a few minutes. "Sarah! Mike! Anyone!" Dr. Cross called out. His voice echoed, strangely, in the valley. No one answered. I found their notebooks first. The last entry was dated 4 days ago. A student named Sarah had written, "The buildings are in perfect condition. It's like time stopped here. We found the chapel today. Tonight we're going to explore inside." That was the last thing any of them wrote. We set up our own camp as darkness fell. Dr. Cross had brought a gas lantern, and I had my heavy-duty flashlight. The old buildings loomed around us like sleeping giants. "Tell me more about their leader," I said as we ate canned soup by the lantern light. "Ezekiel Thorne," Dr. Cross said, pulling out an old book. "He claimed God told him that the world would end on September 21st, 1847. He said his people would be taken up to heaven, but first they had to complete a special mission." "What kind of mission?" That's where the records get strange. The few survivors who escaped before the disappearance said Thorne believed his people had to die to be saved. Not suicide exactly, but some kind of ritual death that would transform them. A chill ran down my back. "When did they disappear?" Dr. Cross checked his notes. "September 21st, 1847. The exact date Thorne said the world would end." I looked at my watch. September 19th, 1985. We were almost at the anniversary. Around 10 o'clock, we heard the first sound. It was faint at first, voices singing. I thought maybe other campers were nearby, but the singing sounded old-fashioned, like hymns from a church. but sadder and more desperate. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Dr. Cross nodded, his face pale. "It's coming from the chapel." The chapel sat at the center of the old town. It was a simple wooden building with a tall steeple. All the windows glowed with a soft yellow light, like candles were burning inside. "Someone's in there," I said, grabbing my flashlight. "Wait," Dr. Cross caught my arm. "What?" "If it's not someone we want to meet." But I was already walking toward the chapel. I'm a park ranger. If people were trespassing in my forest, it was my job to check it out. The singing got louder as I approached the building. I could make out words now, though the language sounded old. The voices were beautiful but haunting, like they were singing about the end of the world. I reached the chapel door and pressed my ear against the wood. At least 20 people were singing inside, maybe more. Their voices rose and fell together in perfect harmony. I tried the door handle. It turned easily. The singing stopped. Every voice went quiet at the exact same moment. The sudden silence was worse than any scream. I pushed the door open and shined my flashlight inside. The chapel was empty. Not just empty. It looked like no one had been there for 100 years. Dust covered the wooden pews. Spider webs hung from the ceiling. The windows were dark and broken. But I could smell candle wax in the air, still warm. I backed away from the chapel, my heart pounding. Dr. Cross was waiting for me by our camp, his face white with fear. "What did you see?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, but something was definitely there. We didn't sleep much that night. Every few hours we heard sounds from the old buildings, footsteps on wooden floors, doors creaking open and closed, voices whispering in the darkness. But whenever I investigated with my flashlight, I found nothing. The next morning brought thick fog that didn't lift until noon. When it finally cleared, we found something that made my blood run cold. The students' camp had been rearranged. Their tents were now set up in a perfect circle around a wooden cross that hadn't been there the night before. Their digging tools were arranged in neat piles. Their notebooks lay open, but the pages were blank now. Every word they had written was Jat 1. "This is impossible," Dr. Cross whispered. I examined the cross more closely. It was made from old wood, but it looked freshly carved. Words were burned into the surface in an old-fashioned script. "The children of the final dawn welcome new believers." "We need to leave," I said, "right now." But when we tried to hike back up the trail, we couldn't find it. The path we had followed down into the valley was gone. Every direction led deeper into the forest or back toward the old town. "The trail has to be here somewhere," Dr. Cross said, panic creeping into his voice. We spent 3 hours searching. The valley seemed to stretch on forever now, much bigger than it had looked from above. Every time I thought I found the way out, the path would curve back toward the buildings. As the sun started to set again, we heard voices. This time they weren't singing. They were talking and laughing, like people having a pleasant conversation. The sounds came from all around the old town. I could hear children playing and women chatting. Men discussed the weather and their work. It sounded like a normal, happy community. But when we looked, the streets were empty. "Dr. Cross," I said quietly, "what exactly happened to those students?" He pulled out his notebook with shaking hands. "According to my research, the children of the final dawn believed they could communicate with the dead. Thorne claimed that people who died in the right way, with the right beliefs, could continue their work in the spirit world." "What kind of work?" "Converting the living, bringing new people into their community." A door slammed somewhere in the town, then another, and another. Like people were coming home for dinner. I grabbed Dr. Cross's arm. "We're leaving, now." But as we started toward what I hoped was the way out, figures began appearing in the doorways of the old buildings. At first they looked like normal people from long ago. Men in simple work clothes, women in long dresses, children in plain shirts and pants. They stood quietly, watching us with calm expressions. I noticed their eyes. They were completely black. Not just the pupils. The entire eye was black, like looking into deep holes. "Welcome, friends," one of them said. It was a tall man with a gray beard. He wore a black coat, like a preacher. "We have been waiting for you." "Ezekiel Thorne," Dr. Cross whispered. The man smiled. "Dr. Cross, your students spoke of you often. They were eager to share their knowledge of our community." "Where are they?" I demanded. Thorne gestured toward the chapel. Through the windows, I could see figures moving inside. They looked like the missing students, but something was wrong with the way they walked. Too stiff, too slow. "They are learning," Thorne said. "As you will learn. The final dawn approaches again. September 21st has always been our day of salvation." More figures appeared in the streets, dozens of them, all with those terrible black eyes. They began walking toward us slowly, their movements perfectly synchronized. "Run!" I shouted. We ran toward the forest, but the trees seemed to move to block our path. Branches reached out like arms trying to catch us. Roots rose from the ground to trip us. Behind us, the people of the final dawn followed at that same slow, steady pace. They didn't need to run. They knew we couldn't really escape. We found shelter in a small shed at the edge of town. I barricaded the door while Dr. Cross collapsed in the corner, breathing hard. "They're not alive," he gasped. "They can't be alive." Through a crack in the wooden wall, I watched the figures spread out through the town. They moved like they were searching for something, or someone. Then I saw the students. Sarah, Mike, and the others walked among the ghostly congregation. They looked normal at first, but as they got closer to our hiding spot, I saw the truth. Their eyes were turning black. Not all the way yet, but dark rings were spread from their pupils. "The conversion process," Dr. Cross whispered. "It's real." One of the students, a young man I didn't recognize, walked directly to our shed. He pressed his face against the wall right next to the crack where I was looking. "Dr. Cross," he said in a dreamy voice, "you should come out now. Brother Thorne wants to show you something wonderful." I held my breath. The student's eyes were half black now, like ink spreading through water. "The truth about God," he continued. "The truth about salvation. Your students understand now. They want you to understand too." Dr. Cross started to stand up. I grabbed his arm. "No," I hissed. "Don't listen." But I could see something changing in his face. A strange, peaceful expression was spreading across his features. "Maybe they're right," he whispered. "Maybe we should listen." I slapped Dr. Cross across the face hard. The peaceful look vanished, replaced by confusion and fear. "They're using some kind of mind control," I said. "Don't listen to their voices." Outside, more people were gathering around the shed. I could hear Thorne speaking to them in that calm, hypnotic voice. "The final dawn comes tomorrow," he said. 138 years we have waited. Our mission was interrupted by death, but death cannot stop the work of God. These new believers will complete what we started. I needed to understand what we were really facing. "Dr. Cross, tell me everything about September 21st, 1847. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. The records from the nearby town mentioned strange reports in the weeks before the disappearance. People said they could hear singing from the hollow every night. Travelers who got too close reported feeling confused and peaceful, like they wanted to stay. What happened on the 21st? No one knows for sure. A trading post owner found the settlement empty the next day, but he also found something else. Dr. Cross pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping. 47 fresh graves behind the chapel. The bodies were buried alive. My blood turned down, Ned to ice. They buried themselves? The newspaper said they found scratches on the inside of the coffins. But here's the strange part. Each grave had a small hole drilled in the lid, like they wanted to be able to breathe while they were buried. Or like they were planning to come back out, I whispered. A new voice joined the chorus outside. It was Sarah, one of the missing students. "Rebecca," she called sweetly, "you don't understand what you're fighting. This isn't death, it's transformation. I can see everything now. Past, present, future. Brother Thorne showed us the truth." "Don't listen," I told Dr. Cross. But I could see him starting to relax again. That's when I remembered something. My great-great-grandmother's stories. She had always talked about one particular tale, about an ancestor who escaped from the hollow where time stands still. I pulled out the small leather journal I always carried. It contained family stories written down by my grandmother. I flipped through the pages until I found it. Jacob Stone escaped the children of the final dawn on September 20th, 1847. He wrote, "They tried to make me believe their lies about God wanting us to die. But I remembered what my own grandmother taught me. God wants us to live, not die. Real salvation comes through living a good life, not through death." Outside, Thorne's voice grew angry. "The bloodline remembers. No matter. Tomorrow, she will understand." That's when I realized the truth. My family had been here before. They had escaped once. Maybe that's why I could resist the voice while Dr. Cross was struggling. But we were still trapped. As dawn approached, I formed a desperate plan. "The graves," I said to Dr. Cross. "If they buried themselves alive, maybe they're still connected to their bodies somehow." "What are you thinking?" "Fire. My ancestors' journal mentions fire. Burn the lies in Tao. Truth will set you free." I had a small camping stove and some fuel. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. "We need to get to the cemetery behind the chapel." Dr. Cross shook his head. "That's where they all are. They're waiting for us. Then we'll have to fight through them." At first light, the voices outside went quiet. Through the crack in the wall, I could see the ghostly figures forming a large circle around the chapel. The students stood with them, their eyes now completely black. This was our only chance. I kicked open the shed door and ran toward the chapel. Dr. Cross followed, though I could see him fighting against the urge to stop and join the congregation. The ghostly people turned to watch us, but they didn't try to stop us. They just smiled those peaceful, terrible smiles. Behind the chapel, I found the cemetery. 47 simple wooden crosses marked the graves. The earth over them was disturbed, like something had been trying to dig its way out. "Rebecca Stone." Thorne appeared beside me. I hadn't seen him move. "Daughter of Jacob Stone, we have waited so long for your return." "My ancestor escaped you once," I said, setting up the camping stove. "He knew the truth. He knew fear," Thorne replied. "But you will know peace." I lit the stove and began pouring fuel on the wooden crosses. "Real peace doesn't come from death." The flames caught quickly, spreading from grave to grave. As the crosses burned, the ghostly figures began to scream, not in pain, but in rage. "You don't understand," Thorne shouted, his calm mask finally slipping. "We were so close. The final dawn was tomorrow." But something else was happening. As the flames spread, the black eyes of the students began to clear. Sarah stumbled backward, confusion replacing the peaceful look on her face. "What? Where are we?" she gasped. The ghostly congregation was fading now, becoming transparent. Only Thorne remained solid, his face twisted with fury. 138 years, he screamed at me. 138 years we have waited." "Then wait. Some more," I said, and threw the last of my fuel directly at him. He vanished with a sound like wind rushing through empty graves. The students were confused and scared, but they were alive and their minds were their own again. Dr. Cross helped me gather them up as the sun rose higher in the sky. The old town was different now. The buildings looked their age, rotted, collapsed, covered in more than a century of decay. The spell was broken. We found the trail out easily. It had been there all along. The official report said the archaeology team had suffered from methane gas poisoning in the old buildings. That's what causes hallucinations and memory loss. It was a believable explanation that kept everyone safe from the real truth. Moonless Hollow was closed to all researchers. The state put up warning signs about dangerous gas deposits. No one would be allowed to camp there again. But I know the truth won't stay buried forever. Every September, when the moon is dark and the fog rolls through the mountains, I can hear faint singing on the wind. The children of the final dawn are still there, still waiting. They'll wait as long as it takes. Dr. Cross never spoke about what happened in the hollow. He retired from teaching the following year and moved to Florida. The students remembered almost nothing, which was probably for the best. I kept Jacob Stone's journal, though. My ancestors' words have helped me understand something important about the work I do. I'm not just protecting old buildings and historical sites, I'm protecting the present from the past. Some things are buried for good reasons. Last week I got a call about strange reports from another remote location in the forest. Hikers have been hearing voices singing hymns in the middle of the night. The songs are beautiful but haunting, like they're calling people to come and listen. I'm getting ready to hike out. There tomorrow. My great-great-grandmother's stories mention several places where time stands still and the dead refuse to rest. Moonless Hollow was just the beginning. But now I know how to fight them. Fire, truth, and the wisdom of those who escaped before. Sometimes the old stories aren't just stories. Sometimes they're warnings passed down through generations, waiting for someone brave enough to listen and strong enough to act. My name is Rebecca Stone, and I protect people from the past. It's dangerous work, but somebody has to do it. After all, the dead have all the time in the world to wait, and they're very, very patient. My name is David Murphy, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. People think my job is all about helping lost hikers and checking camping permits, but the truth is, I spend most of my time making sure the trails and bridges don't kill anyone. I have an engineering degree, and that's why they put me in charge of all the structures in Allegheny National Forest. The bridge over Kinzua Creek Gorge was built back in the 1920s. It's nothing fancy, just steel beams and wooden planks stretching across a 200-foot drop. Most visitors don't even notice it, but I know every bolt and board on that thing. I have to inspect it every year before summer hiking season starts. That June morning in 1988, I drove my truck down the dirt road to the bridge. The creek was running high from all the spring rain we'd had. You could hear the water rushing far below, echoing up through the gorge like it was trapped down there. I grabbed my clipboard and toolkit from the passenger seat. The air felt heavy, like it does before a storm, even though the sky was clear. Something made me stop and look around before I stepped onto the bridge. The woods were too quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. I've always been a practical man. My dad taught me that if you can't measure it or fix it, it probably isn't worth worrying about. But standing there that morning, I felt something I couldn't measure. A cold spot right in my chest, like someone had pressed an ice cube against my heart. The bridge looked the same as always, steel painted green, wood planks weathered gray. I walked to the middle and looked down. The creek was brown with runoff, moving fast and angry. White foam swirled around the rocks way down at the bottom. I started my usual routine, checking each support beam for rust or cracks. Everything looked good. The bolts were tight, the wood wasn't rotting, but as I worked, I kept hearing something weird. At first I thought it was just the wind or the water, but it sounded almost like voices. I stopped working and listened hard. There it was again, faint but clear. It sounded like people calling out, like they needed help. But when I looked around, I was completely alone. "Just the bridge," I said out loud. My voice sounded strange in the quiet air. Old bridges make all kinds of noises. I'd heard about this before. The locals called it the Screaming Bridge, said you could hear voices coming from the gorge. I always figured it was just the way sound bounced around down there. Steel and stone can play tricks on your ears. But as I kept working, the voices got clearer. And that's when I realized something that made my blood turn cold. One of those voices was calling my name. I tried to focus on my work, but the voices kept getting stronger. They weren't random sounds anymore. They were definitely human voices, and they were scared. Really scared. "David, help us! We can't get out!" I dropped my wrench. It clattered on the bridge boards and fell through a gap, disappearing into the gorge below. I never heard it hit bottom. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone down there? Are you hurt?" My voice echoed back from the rocks, but no one answered. The The calling had stopped the moment I spoke. I walked to the edge of the bridge and looked down. The gorge was deep and full of shadows, even in the bright morning sun. If someone had fallen down there, I might not be able to see them from up here. But how would they know my name? I went back to my truck and got my radio. Base, this is Murphy at the Kinzua Bridge. I'm getting reports of people in distress down in the gorge. I need backup for a possible rescue. Static crackled for a few seconds. Then Sally's voice came through from the ranger station. David, we haven't had any missing person reports. Are you sure about this? I wasn't sure about anything anymore. I'm hearing voices, Sally. Multiple people calling for help. They sound trapped. Could be hikers who went off trail, she said. I'll send Tom out with the rescue gear. ETA about 30 minutes. I clicked off the radio and walked back to the bridge. This time I brought my flashlight, even though it was broad daylight. I shined it down into the shadows, moving the beam back and forth across the rocks and water. Nothing. No people, no camping gear, no sign anyone had ever been down there. But as I stood there, the voices started again. This time they were much clearer, like someone had turned up the volume. David, please, the water's too high. We're trapped. We can't swim. Help us, David. Don't leave us here. My hands started shaking. The voices were coming from directly below me, but my flashlight showed nothing but empty rocks and rushing water. I could hear at least 4 different people, men, women, maybe even a child. And then I heard something that nearly made me fall off the bridge. David, it's Uncle Thomas. I know you can hear us. Please help. Uncle Thomas. My great-uncle Thomas Murphy, who had died before I was even born. My dad used to tell me stories about him, how he'd tried to cross this very creek during a flood back in 1919. He'd been with his wife and 3 kids, trying to get to town when his youngest got sick. The old ferry was gone, washed out by the storm. Thomas thought they could make it across on foot. None of them did. All 5 bodies were found a week later, miles downstream. That's why they built the bridge, so no one else would drown trying to cross Kinzua Creek. This isn't real, I said out loud, but my voice was shaking now. Dead people don't talk. It's just the water and the wind and... David, why won't you help us? We're your family. I backed away from the edge. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the creek noise. I needed to get off this bridge. I needed to go back to the truck and wait for Tom. But as I turned to Ulpi, I heard something that stopped me cold. A child's voice, thin and scared. Daddy, I can't hold on anymore. The water's too strong. I found myself walking back to the edge. I knew it was crazy, but those voices sounded so real, so scared. What if there really was someone down there? What if I left and someone died because I was too scared to help? I got down on my hands and knees and crawled to the very edge of the bridge, sticking my head out as far as I dared. The voices were loud now, like they were just a few feet below me. That's it, David. We can see you. Throw us a rope. Hurry. The current's getting stronger. Help us, please. We don't want to die. But when I shined my light down, there was still nothing there, just water and rocks and shadows. The voices were coming from empty air. I scrambled back from the edge, breathing hard. Something was very wrong here, something that had nothing to do with engineering or bridge maintenance. That's when I heard Tom's truck coming down the road behind me. Tom Rodriguez had been a ranger almost as long as me. He was a good man to have around in a crisis. Calm, smart, and strong enough to carry a grown man up a mountain if he had to. He parked next to my truck and got out with a coil of rescue rope over his shoulder. So what do we have, Dave? I started, then stopped. How do you tell your partner you're hearing dead relatives? I keep hearing people calling for help from the gorge, but I can't see anyone down there. Tom walked to the edge and looked down. Sound can be tricky in a place like this, he said. All those rocks and that running water, it bounces around, makes echoes. Could be hikers a mile away and it sounds like they're right below us. He was probably right. That's what I wanted to believe anyway. But then the voices started up again, just as Tom was leaning over the rail. Please, Samo, help us. We're drowning. Tom jerked back like he'd been slapped. His face went white. Jesus, Dave, there's definitely someone down there. You hear them too? Clear as day, sounds Like a whole family. He unslung the rope. I'm going down. Tom, wait. I grabbed his arm. There's something weird about this. I've been hearing these voices for over an hour, but I can't see anyone. And they know things they shouldn't know. What do you mean? Before I could answer, a woman's voice rose up from the gorge. Tom Rodriguez. Thank God you're here. Your daughter Maria. She's worried about you. She says you didn't call last night. Tom dropped the rope. His face went from white to gray. How do they know about Maria? She lives in Pittsburgh. I was supposed to call her last night, but I forgot. Tom, we need to get out of here. Now! But he wasn't listening. He was staring down into the gorge with a strange look on his face. Maria worries about me working alone out here, he said quietly. I promised I'd call every night when I'm on duty. Tom, look at me. I stepped between him and the edge. There's no one down there. I've been looking for an hour with a flashlight. There's nothing but rocks and water. But I can hear them so clearly. He tried to step around me, but I blocked him. That's the problem. We shouldn't be able to hear them this clearly if they're really down there. Think about it, Tom. The acoustics are all wrong. The voices started getting louder, more desperate. Tom, don't listen to him. He's trying to stop you from saving us. Your daughter needs you to be a hero, Tom. We're going to die if you don't help us right now. Tom's eyes were getting glassy, like he was in a trance. They're right, Dave. Maria always says she's proud that her dad saves people. I can't just stand here. He pushed past me toward the edge. I tackled him, and we both went down hard on the bridge boards. Tom was stronger than me, but I had desperation on my side. Tom, listen to me. These aren't real people. Get off me, Dave. You're drowning. We wrestled for a few seconds, but Tom was fighting to get to the edge, and I was fighting to save his life. That made me stronger. I managed to pin him down. Tom, I need you to think. These voices, they know things about us. Personal things. Dead people things. That seemed to get through to him. He stopped struggling and looked at me. What are you talking about? One of them claimed to be my great-uncle Thomas. He died in 1919, Tom, 70 years ago. He drowned right here in this creek with his whole family. Tom's eyes started to clear. That's impossible. The bridge, Tom, it's doing something to the sound, making us hear things that aren't there, or, I swallowed hard, making us hear things that shouldn't be there. We helped each other up. The voices were still calling, but they sounded different now. Angry. David Murphy, you coward. Just like your father, he never helped anyone either. Tom Rodriguez, your daughter will be ashamed of you. You let innocent people die. We'll tell everyone what kind of men you really are. Tom shook his head like he was trying to clear water out of his ears. This is crazy, Dave. Bridges don't make people hear dead voices. Then you tell me what's happening here. Before he could answer, we heard another truck coming down the road. But this one sounded different. Older, rougher. The engine was knocking like it was about to die. We looked toward the road, but we couldn't see anything through the trees yet. The truck sound got closer, then stopped. We heard a door slam. Footsteps crunched on the gravel, coming toward us. Slow, heavy footsteps. Dave? Tom? You boys having trouble with the bridge? I knew that voice. It was Harold Jennings, the maintenance supervisor. But Harold had died 3 days ago. They found him at the bottom of the gorge, right below this bridge. The funeral was yesterday. The footsteps were getting closer. Harold Jennings walked out of the tree line like he'd just finished a normal day's work. He looked exactly the same. Gray hair, flannel shirt, works, boots. Except his clothes were soaking wet, and there were dark stains that might have been blood. Harold, Tom whispered. But we were at your funeral yesterday. Harold smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. Water dripped from his hair and clothes, forming puddles on the bridge boards. Funeral? Hell, Tom, I've been working. Same job I've had for 25 years. Maintaining this bridge. I could barely speak. Harold, you're dead. You jumped from this bridge 3 days ago. Jumped? Harold laughed, and the sound echoed strangely in the gorge. I didn't jump, Dave. I went down to help them, same as you're going to do. The voices from below started up again, but now I could see something in Harold's eyes. The same glassy look Tom had gotten, the same look I'd probably had myself. Harold, who told you to go down there? The family, of course. They've been calling for help for 70 years. Someone has to answer eventually. He pointed toward the edge. They're still down there, Dave. Still drowning. Still needing help. I looked at Tom. He was backing away from Harold, and I could see the fear in his eyes. At least he was thinking clearly now. Harold, show us where they are, I said. Show us exactly where you see them. Harold walked to the edge of the bridge and pointed down. Right there. Thomas Murphy and his wife and 3 kids have been trapped in the current since 1919. The water's too strong for them to get out. I walked up beside him, keeping my distance. When I looked down, I saw the same thing I'd been seeing all morning. Empty water and rocks. But Harold was pointing and waving like he could see people. They're right there, Dave. Can't you see them? No, Harold, because they're not there. They drowned 70 years ago. Their bodies were found downstream. Harold turned to look at me, and I saw something terrible in his eyes. They weren't really his eyes anymore. They were older, darker, full of water. Bodies? Harold said. But his voice sounded different now, like multiple people talking at once. We're not bodies, Dave. We're family. Your family. And family helps family. The voice that came out of Harold's mouth was my great-uncle Thomas's voice, the same voice I'd been hearing from the gorge. I stumbled backward. Tom, we need to leave. Right now. But Tom was staring at Harold with that glassy look again. Harold's right, Dave. We can't just leave them down there. Tom, that's not Harold anymore. Look at his eyes. Tom looked, and I saw him shudder. But the voices from below were getting stronger, and I could see Tom starting to waver. Tom Rodriguez, the Harold thing said in that multiple voice. Your daughter Maria. She's going to be so disappointed when she finds out you let children drown. That's not fair, Tom said weakly. Life's not fair, Tom. But death is different. Death is forever, unless someone helps. I grabbed Tom's arm and started pulling him toward the trucks. We're leaving. Now. But the Harold thing moved to block our path. Up close, I could see that the water dripping from his clothes wasn't clear. It was dark, like creek water full of mud and debris. You can't leave, Dave. You're a Murphy. This is Murphy family business. The Murphy family business ended in 1919 when they all drowned. No, the thing said. And now I could hear the woman's voice and the children's voices mixed in with Thomas and Harold. It ends when someone comes down to help us, when someone finally answers our call. I looked around desperately. We were trapped on the bridge between the Harold thing and a 200-foot drop. Our trucks were behind the thing, and there was no other way off the bridge. That's when I remembered something from the old stories my dad had told me. Thomas Murphy had been alone when he tried to cross the creek. His brother had been with him, my great-grandfather, but my great-grandfather had refused to go into the water. He'd said the current was too strong, that they should wait for the flood to go down. Thomas had called him a coward and gone into the water anyway. All 5 of them drowned, and my great-grandfather never forgave himself. You want to know why I won't help you? I said to the thing. Because my great-grandfather was right. The water was too strong. You died because you were too stubborn to listen to good advice. The thing that looked like Harold snarled, and water poured out of its mouth. Your family has owed us for 70 years, David Murphy. Today you pay. It lunged at me, but I was ready. I sidestepped and shoved it toward the edge of the bridge. The thing stumbled but didn't fall. Tom, the trucks! Go! Tom snapped out of his trance and ran for his truck. I was right behind him, but the Harold thing grabbed my ankle. Its hand felt like ice water and old bones. I kicked hard and felt my boot connect with something soft. The thing let go with a scream that sounded like rushing water and drowning voices all mixed together. We made it to Tom's truck and jumped in. Tom had the engine started before I even got my door closed. As we drove away, I looked back at the bridge. The Herald thing was standing at the edge, pointing down at the gorge. Even from a distance, I could hear the voices calling after us. Cowards, just like all the Murphys. You'll be back. Family always comes back. We drove straight to the ranger station and told Sally everything. She looked at us like we'd lost our minds, but she made the calls anyway. The bridge was closed to the public while a team of engineers came in to do a full structural analysis. What they found was interesting. The bridge's design created what they called an acoustic resonance chamber. The shape of the gorge, combined with the bridge's steel beams and the way the water flowed below, made a perfect ecosystem. Sounds could bounce around down there for a long time before they faded away. But that didn't explain how we'd heard voices that knew personal things about us. It didn't explain Harold coming back from the dead. It didn't explain why 7 maintenance workers had jumped from that bridge over the past 70 years. The official report said the bridge was structurally sound, but recommended installing sound barriers to reduce the acoustic effects. They put up signs warning hikers about the possibility of hearing phantom voices due to natural sound distortion. I requested a transfer to a different section of the forest. Tom did the same. We never talked about what really happened that day, but sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with a question in his eyes. The same question I was asking myself. What if we'd stayed on that bridge longer? What if we'd kept listening to those voices? Would we have joined Harold at the bottom of the gorge? I still work for the Park Service, but now I stick to fire towers and hiking trails. I never go near bridges anymore, especially old ones. And I never work alone. Because sometimes, late at night when I'm doing paperwork, I can still hear them calling. Not from the bridge, that's 100 miles away now. But somehow the voices found a way to follow me. David, they whisper when the office gets quiet. You still owe us. Family always pays its debts. I've learned to ignore them, mostly. But every year, around the anniversary of that day, the voices get stronger. And every year, I have to work a little harder to resist the urge to drive back to Kinswa Creek Gorge. Because part of me knows they're right. My family does owe them. And someday, that debt will have to be paid. I just hope it won't be by me. My name is Margaret Caldwell, and I've been a forest ranger for 16 years. People think my job is all about hiking trails and fighting fires, but my real work is different. I study old farms that got swallowed up by the forest. It's like being a detective, except I'm looking for clues about families who lived here decades ago. I have a PhD in rural sociology, which sounds fancy, but really just means I love learning about how farm families used to live. These old homesteads tell amazing stories if you know how to read the signs. A rusty plow left in a field, stone walls running through thick woods, sometimes even dishes still sitting on a kitchen table, waiting for a family that's never coming home. October 1991 was the best time of year for my work. The leaves were turning every shade of red and gold you could imagine. The air was crisp and clean, perfect for hiking through the mountains. But something felt different that month. The weather was too warm, like summer didn't want to let go. We called it Indian summer. Those last perfect days before winter comes to stay. I was heading to a place called Whitmore Farm, way up in the Green Mountain National Forest in Vermont. The map showed it as nothing but trees now, but I knew better. Hidden under all that forest was a complete 1930s farm, abandoned during the Great Depression. My job was to catalog everything before the Forest Service tore down the old buildings. They were worried about hikers getting hurt if the roofs caved in. The hike took me 3 hours through thick woods. Maple trees dropped their leaves like golden snow as I walked. But as I got closer to where the farm should be, something strange happened. The air got warmer instead of cooler. The leaves on the trees weren't falling, they were just hanging there, perfectly red and orange like someone had painted them that way. Then I saw it, a clearing penned up in front of me, and there was the Whitmore Farm, looking like it had just been abandoned yesterday instead of 57 years ago. The white farmhouse stood straight and tall. The red barn had fresh paint. Fences ran in neat lines around fields that should have been overgrown with forest. But here's what made my skin crawl. There were crops growing in those fields. Corn stood in perfect rows, heavy with ears, ready for harvest. Pumpkins dotted a patch near the house, round and orange and fat. Apple trees hung heavy with fruit that looked good enough to eat. This was impossible. I'd read the files. The Whitmore family had vanished in October 1934, right in the middle of harvest season. The parents, 3 kids, even the grandparents, all gone overnight. The neighbors had come looking when smoke stopped rising from their chimney. They found half-finished meals on the table, clothes hanging on the line, but no people anywhere. I walked to the farmhouse and peered through a window. Inside looked like a museum. Everything was clean and neat, like the family had just stepped out for a minute. A pot sat on the wood stove. Chairs were pulled up to a kitchen table set for 8 people. Even the calendar on the wall was still turned to October 1934. The sun was getting low, painting everything golden. I should have set up my tent and started my documentation work. But something in the air made me nervous. It smelled like wood smoke and apple pie and fresh-cut hay. It smelled like a working farm, not a place that had been empty for over half a century. That's when I heard it, the sound of a cow mooing somewhere behind the barn. I stood frozen by that window for a full minute, listening. The mooing came again, low and patient, like a cow waiting to be milked. But according to every record I'd read, there hadn't been livestock on this farm since 1934. I pulled out my notebook and pen, trying to think like the scientist I was trained to be. Maybe some wild cattle had wandered up from a lower farm. Maybe I was hearing things. The mountains could play tricks with sound. But as I walked around the house, I saw fresh boot prints in the dirt. Man's boots, size 10 or so, with a distinctive wear pattern on the right heel. The prints led from the back door to the barn, then back again. They looked like they'd been made that morning. My heart started beating faster. If someone was living here illegally, I needed to know. Squatters in the national forest were dangerous. They didn't like being found, and they were usually running from something. I followed the boot prints to the barn. The big doors were slightly open, and I could hear movement inside. Soft shuffling sounds, like someone doing chores. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The smell hit me first, hay and grain and that warm, sweet smell of dairy cows. Sunlight streamed through cracks in the boards, lighting up dust motes that danced in the air. And there, in a stall at the far end, stood a Holstein cow, black and white, and very real. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone here?" No answer, but the cow turned its head to look at me. Its eyes were strange, too bright, too knowing. It mooed again, then went back to eating hay from a manger that looked freshly filled. I walked deeper into the barn, looking around. Everything was old but perfectly maintained. Hay bales stacked to the roof, tools hanging on pegs, each in its proper place. A milk bucket sitting clean and ready by the cow's stall. That's when I saw the man. He was standing in the shadows near the back wall, wearing overalls and a flannel shirt. A beaten-up felt hat sat on his head. He had his back to me and was doing something with his hands, sharpening a scythe, it looked like. "Excuse me," I said, louder this time. "I'm with the Forest Service. I need to speak with you." He didn't turn around, didn't even seem to hear me, just kept running the whetstone along the curved blade of the scythe in long, ong, steady strokes. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound echoed in the quiet barn. I walked closer. "Sir, I'm talking to you." When I was maybe 10 feet away, he finally turned around. "I'm not easy to scare. I've seen bears, wildcats, all kinds of dangerous things in these mountains. But when that man looked at me, I felt ice water run down my spine. His face was wrong. Not deformed or anything like that. Just wrong. Too pale, like he'd never seen sunlight. His eyes were the color of winter sky, washed out and empty. When he smiled at me, his teeth looked gray in the dim light. "Afternoon, miss," he said, tipping his hat. His voice sounded far away, like he was talking from the bottom of a well. "Fine weather we're having for harvest." I tried to speak, but couldn't find my voice. There was something about him that made my brain want to run screaming, even though he seemed friendly enough. "I'm Frank Whitmore," he said, turning back to his scythe. "This here's my farm. Been in the family since 1889. Whitmore, the family that had vanished. But that was impossible. Even if this man had been a baby in 1934, he'd be nearly 60 now. This guy looked maybe 40, 45 at most. "Mr. Whitmore," I managed to say, "I think there's been some confusion. This farm was abandoned in 1934. I'm here from the Forest Service to document the buildings before they're torn down." He stopped sharpening and looked at me again. That empty smile never wavered. 1934? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Miss, it's October 1934 right now. We're just getting ready to bring in the last of the harvest before the first frost hits." The air in the barn suddenly felt thick and hard to breathe. I looked around wildly, trying to make sense of what was happening. The cow mooed again, still watching me with those two bright eyes. "I need to go," I said, backing toward the door. "I'll come back tomorrow to start my work." "Oh, but you can't leave now," Frank Whitmore said, still in that friendly, far-away voice. "Martha's got supper almost ready, and we don't get many. Visitors way up here. Besides." He turned around completely now, and I saw something that made my blood freeze. The scythe in his hands wasn't just sharp. It was stained dark along the blade. Dark with something that looked suspiciously like dried blood. "Besides," he continued, "we could really use some help bringing in the harvest. It's been such a good year for crops. Shame to let any of it go to waste." I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the tree line, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. When I finally caught my breath, I turned to look back at the farm. Everything looked normal from a distance, peaceful even. Smoke was rising from the chimney now, and warm yellow light glowed in the farmhouse windows. If I hadn't just met Frank Whitmore and his bloody scythe, it would have looked like the most welcoming place in the world. I set up my camp in the woods, about a quarter-mile from the farm. As the sun went down, I tried to think rationally about what I'd seen. Maybe the man really was named Whitmore, could be a descendant who'd moved back to the old homestead. Maybe he was just a little odd from living alone in the mountains. And that stain on the scythe could have been anything. Rust, tree sap, anything. But deep down I knew something was very wrong with that place. As darkness fell, I heard voices carrying across the fields. A woman calling that dinner was ready, children laughing and playing. An older man's voice saying something about checking the animals one more time before bed. It sounded like a normal farm family settling in for the night. Except I knew from the records that the entire Whitmore family had 8 people, parents, 3 children, and grandparents. And they'd all vanished 57 years ago. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Frank Whitmore's pale face and that Terry-ta, blow-empty smile. Around midnight, I heard something that made me sit bolt upright in my sleeping bag. Singing. A woman's voice, clear and sweet, floating across the fields. "Bringing in the sheaves, bringing in the sheaves, we shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves." It was an old harvest hymn. My grandmother used to sing it when I was little. But hearing it now, in the middle of the night, from an abandoned farm that shouldn't have anyone living in it, it made my skin crawl. The singing stopped suddenly, leaving only the sound of wind in the trees. Then I heard footsteps. Someone was walking through the woods, coming toward my camp. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, like whoever it was knew exactly where I was hiding. Twigs snapped under their feet, leaves rustled as they brushed against low branches. I grabbed my flashlight but didn't turn it on. Better to stay hidden in the darkness. The footsteps got closer, 50 yards away, 20, 10. Then they stopped, right at the edge of my campsite. I held my breath and waited. After what felt like forever, a voice called out. A woman's voice, kind and motherly. Miss, are you out there? I brought you some fresh apple pie, still warm from the oven." I could smell it now, cinnamon and brown sugar and flaky crust. My stomach growled despite my fear. I hadn't eaten since morning, and that pie smelled incredible. "Don't be afraid, dear," the voice continued. "I'm Martha Whitmore. My husband Frank said you'd stop by the barn this afternoon. We'd love to have you join us for a proper meal." Martha Whitmore, Frank's wife. According to the records, she'd been 28 when the family disappeared. She'd had 3 young children and had been pregnant with a 4th. Against every instinct I had, I turned on my flashlight. A woman stood at the edge of my camp holding a steaming pie in her hands. She looked exactly like you'd expect a 1930s farm wife to look. Simple dress, apron tied around her waist, hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was pretty, with kind eyes and a warm smile. She was also completely see-through. I could see the trees behind her, right through her body. When she moved, she flickered like a candle flame in the wind. "Oh," she said, looking down at herself with what seemed like mild surprise. "I suppose I'm not quite myself tonight. Don't mind that, dear. It happens sometimes when I get excited about company." I wanted to scream, I wanted to run. Instead, I found myself staring at the pie in her translucent hands. It looked absolutely real, and it still smelled amazing. "What do you want?" I whispered. Martha's smile got wider. "Want? Why, we don't want anything, dear. We just want to share our harvest with you. It's been such a good year for crops, the best we've ever had." She took a step closer, and I noticed her feet didn't quite touch the ground. "You see, we've been working so hard to bring everything in before the frost. Day and night we've been working. The corn, the apples, the pumpkins, everything's ready now. But we need help getting it all to market before it spoils." "The market?" I said, my voice barely working. "Oh yes, we have to get the harvest to town and sell it, or we'll lose the farm. The bankman said if we don't make our payment by November 1st, they'll take everything. We can't let that happen. This farm has been in Frank's family for generations." I stared at her, trying to understand. "Mrs. Whitmore, what year do you think it is?" She looked confused by the question. "Why, it's 1934, of course. October 1934. We're having the finest harvest in years, but time's running short. Will you help us, dear, please?" The pie in her hands was starting to fade, becoming as transparent as the rest of her. But the smell was still there, still making my mouth water. "I can't help you," I said. "I'm sorry, but I can't." Martha's face changed. The kindness drained out of her eyes, replaced by something desperate and hungry. "But you have to," she said, her voice losing its warm, motherly tone. "You have to help us. We've been waiting so long for someone to come, someone who understands about farms and harvests and growing things." She floated closer, and I could see now that her dress was torn in places. There were dark stains on the fabric that looked suspiciously like blood. "We know who you are, Margaret Caldwell. We know you study old farms. You understand how important this work is. You know that a harvest can't be wasted." How did she know my name? I'd never told Frank who I was. "Please," Martha whispered, reaching out with hands that flickered like smoke. "Help us save our farm. Help us bring in the last harvest." I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and ran again, crashing through the woods in the dark. Behind me, I heard Martha calling, "We'll be waiting, dear. We'll be waiting for you to come home." I spent the rest of the night huddled against a big oak tree, jumping at every sound. When dawn finally came, I hiked down to my truck and drove straight to the nearest library to research the Whitmore family. What I found made everything click into place, and it was worse than I'd imagined. The Whitmores hadn't just vanished in October 1934. They'd been murdered. A neighbor named Henry Cobb had been trying to buy their farm for years, offering far less than it was worth. When the Depression hit and the banks started foreclosure proceedings, Cobb saw his chance. He'd gone to the farm on Halloween night, 1934, intending to intimidate Frank into selling. But something had gone wrong. Maybe Frank had fought back. Maybe Cobb had lost his temper. Either way, by morning, all 8 members of the Whitmore family were dead, buried somewhere on their own land. Cobb had claimed they'd simply abandoned the farm and moved west, like so many other families during the Depression. Since times were hard and people were disappearing all over the country, no one investigated too closely. Cobb eventually bought the farm from the bank for almost nothing, but here's the thing, he'd never been able to live there. Every October, he'd claimed, strange things started happening. Lights in the windows, voices calling across the fields, the sound of farm work being done in the middle of the night. Cobb had sold the farm after just 2 years, and every owner after him had the same problems. Finally, in 1952, the state had bought the land and incorporated it into the national forest. The buildings were supposed to be torn down, but somehow that had never happened. Work crews would start the demolition, then quit after a few days, claiming they felt unwelcome. Now I understood. The Whitmore family was still there, still trying to complete their final harvest. They'd been murdered right before they could save their farm, and their spirits were trapped in that eternal task. But they'd been alone for so long that they'd started to change. The kindness was still there, but it was twisted now, desperate and hungry. They didn't just want help with their harvest. They wanted someone to stay with them forever, to be part of their ghostly farm family. I knew I should have left. Reported back to my supervisor that the site was too dangerous for documentation. Let someone else deal with the Whitmores. Instead, I found myself driving back up the mountain that afternoon. I'm still not sure why I went back. Maybe it was my training as a historian. I needed to understand their story completely. Maybe it was sympathy for a family that had been so brutally wronged. Or maybe the Whitmores were already starting to influence my mind, calling me back to their eternal harvest. The farm looked different in daylight, more real somehow. I could see the whole family working in the fields now. Frank with his scythe, cutting grain that should have been harvested decades ago. Martha hanging laundry that flickered between solid and transparent. 3 children playing in the yard, their laughter echoing strangely in the warm October air. 2 elderly people sitting on the porch, rocking in chairs that creaked with no wind to move them. They all looked up when I walked into the farmyard. Their smiles were so welcoming, so genuinely happy to see me, that for a moment I forgot how terrified I'd been the night before. "Margaret!" Martha called, waving from the clothesline. "I knew you'd come back. I just knew it." Frank walked over, leaning on his scythe. In the daylight, I could see that the dark stains on the blade weren't blood. They were just rust and dirt, the normal wear of a working tool. "Afternoon, Miss Caldwell," he said, tipping his hat. "Beautiful day for harvest work, isn't it?" The children ran over to surround me, 2 boys and a girl, all with the same pale skin and 2 bright eyes as their parents. They looked maybe 8, 10, and 12 years old. "Are you going to help us?" the little girl asked, taking my hand in hers. Her fingers felt cold but solid, like touching ice water. "We've got so much work to do," one of the boys added. "The corn needs to come in and the apples need picking, and Grandpa says there's going to be frost soon." I looked around at their faces, all eager and hopeful and desperate. They really believed they could still save their farm. They really thought it was still 1934, and they still had a chance to make their mortgage payment and keep their home. "Listen to me," I said gently. "All of you. I need to tell you something important." Their smiles faded as they heard the sadness in my voice. "You don't need to worry about saving the farm anymore," I continued. "You don't need to bring in the harvest. You've already done enough. You've worked so hard for so many years, but it's time to rest now." Frank shook his head. "But we haven't finished. Look around. There's still so much to do." "Mr. Whitmore," I said, looking directly into his pale eyes, "it's not 1934 anymore. It's 1991. You and your family, you died 57 years ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. Then Martha let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "That's impossible," she whispered. "We're right here. We're still working. The harvest." "The harvest is finished," I said. "It's been finished for decades. Your farm is part of history now. Your story is being preserved, just like you always wanted." The grandmother on the porch spoke for the first time, her voice ancient and tired. "I knew," she said quietly. "I've known for years that something was wrong. Time felt strange. But we couldn't stop working. We couldn't rest." "You can rest now," I told her. All of you. Your farm will be remembered. Your story will be told. People will know how hard you worked and how much you loved this land. One by one, they began to fade. Not disappearing exactly, but becoming lighter, more transparent, like morning mist burning off in the sun. Will you tell them? Frank asked as he started to fade. Will you tell people about our farm, about how it was when we were alive? I promise, I said. Martha smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, the desperation was gone from her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for understanding. The children waved goodbye as they faded away, and then there was only the grandfather, still sitting in his rocking chair on the porch. Take care of the land, he said, in a voice like wind through dry leaves. It remembers everything, every family that ever worked it, every harvest that ever grew here. Take care of it, and it will take care of you. Then he was gone too, and I was alone in a farmyard that suddenly looked its age, buildings sagging, paint peeling, weeds growing up through the floorboards of the porch. But the feeling of the place had changed. The desperate urgency was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and completion. The Whitmore family had finally been allowed to rest. I spent the next 3 days documenting everything I could about Whitmore Farm. Every building, every piece of equipment, every detail of how the family had lived and worked. I measured rooms and photographed tools and drew maps of fields that were slowly being reclaimed by forest. But I also wrote down their story. The real story, not just the official records. How they'd struggled during the Depression, how they'd fought to save their farm, how they'd been murdered by a greedy neighbor who wanted their land for nothing. When I submitted my report, I recommended that Whitmore Farm be designated as a National Historic Agricultural Site, not just for its buildings and equipment, but for what it represented, the thousands of small family farms that were lost during the Great Depression, and the families who sacrificed everything trying to hold on to their way of life. My supervisor thought I was crazy at first. A ghost story in an official Forest Service report? But the historical documentation was solid, and the site really was a perfectly preserved example of 1930s farming. When the state historians came to evaluate it, they were amazed. The farm is a museum now. Visitors can walk through the house and barn, see how a Depression-era family lived and worked. There's a plaque by the front door that tells the story of Frank and Martha Whitmore and their children, and how they fought to save their farm right up until the end. I go back there every October, partly for my job, but mostly just to visit. The place feels different now, peaceful instead of desperate, welcoming instead of haunting. Sometimes I catch a whiff of apple pie on the wind, or hear children laughing in the distance. But it's not scary anymore. It's like the land remembers being happy, and it wants to share that happiness with visitors. The local schools bring kids there on field trips now. They learn about agriculture and history and what life was like before modern farming. The children are always fascinated by the old tools and equipment, and they ask a million questions about how people lived, without electricity or running water. I never tell them about the ghosts, but sometimes when the autumn light falls just right across the farmyard, I see a flicker of movement in the windows, a shadow on the porch, the suggestion of someone hanging laundry that isn't really there. The Whitmore family is still there, I think. But they're not trapped anymore. They're not desperately trying to complete an impossible harvest. They're just present. Part of the land they loved so much. Part of the story that continues to unfold in that peaceful valley. My job has changed since then. I still document old farm sites, but now I pay attention to more than just buildings and equipment. I listen for the stories the land wants to tell. I look for signs of the families who poured their hearts and souls into working the soil, raising crops, caring for animals. Because I learned something important from the Whitmores. Every farm has a story, and every farmer leaves something of themselves in the land they work. Most of the time, those traces are subtle, a stone wall built with particular care, a barn positioned to catch the morning sun just right, an orchard planted in rows that spell out a child's name. But sometimes, when the story is powerful enough and the connection to the land runs deep enough, something more remains. something that wants to be remembered and honored and understood. I've found 3 more sites like Whitmore Farm since then, families whose love for their land was so strong that part of them never really left. They're not haunted places. They're blessed places. Sacred places where the bond between people and earth runs deeper than death. And every October, when the leaves turn red and gold and the air smells like wood smoke and apples, I remember Frank Whitmore and his bloody scythe, Martha with her transparent hands, and 3 children who just wanted to heat. LP, their parents, saved the family farm. Their harvest is finally complete. Their story has been told. Their rest has been earned. But the land remembers, and so do I. My name is Samuel Jackson, and I've been a ranger at Chattahoochee National Forest for 5 years now. I specialize in youth education programs, taking school groups into the wilderness to teach them about nature and survival. Growing up in foster care, bouncing from home to home, the mountains were the only place that ever felt like they belonged to me. Now I try to give that same feeling to kids who might need it. Blood Mountain is my favorite spot to bring groups. At 4,461 feet, it's the highest peak on the Appalachian Trail in Georgia. The Cherokee used to call it something different, Slaughter Mountain, but I never paid much attention to the old stories. Mountain legends were just stories to make camping more exciting for the kids. It was late April 1974 when Mrs. Henderson called about bringing her 5th grade class from Atlanta. 23 kids, she said, plus 3 teachers. They wanted to do a spring nature study, wildflower identification, basic outdoor skills, maybe some Cherokee history if I knew any. I told her we could handle it. Blood Mountain was perfect in April, with wildflowers blooming everywhere and the weather just right for camping. The kids arrived on a Thursday morning in 2 yellow school buses, chattering and excited. Tommy Rodriguez was one of the quiet ones, always asking smart questions about the plants we found. Susan Baker stuck close to her teacher but had bright eyes that took in everything. Both were good kids, the responsible type that other teachers trusted. We set up camp in the designated area about halfway up the mountain. I went through my usual safety talk, buddy system, stay with the group, whistle signals if you get separated. The teachers, Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Walsh, and Miss Peters, helped me organize the tents. Boys on one side, girls on the other, adults in the middle. The first day went perfectly. We identified SAS, 17 different wildflowers, learned to read animal tracks, and I taught them how to find north without a compass. Around the campfire that night, I told them some Cherokee stories. Nothing scary, just tales about why the mountains were important to the native people who lived here first. Tommy raised his hand. Mr. Jackson, why did the Cherokee call this Slaughter Mountain? I kept my voice light. Old tribal wars, Tommy, long time ago. Different tribes would fight over hunting grounds. Susan asked, "Did kids live here too?" "Sure did. Cherokee families lived all through these mountains until..." I paused. These kids didn't need to hear about the Trail of Tears on their first night camping, until they had to move west. The kids went to sleep easily, tired from hiking and fresh air. I did my usual night check around 9:30. All tents zipped, no sounds except normal forest noise. The teachers were playing cards in Mrs. Henderson's tent. Everything was normal. I woke up at dawn like I always do and started coffee on the camp stove. The sun was just touching the treetops, painting everything gold. Perfect morning for our summit hike. I was planning the day's route when Mrs. Henderson came running out of her tent. "Sam! Tommy and Susan are gone." My first thought was bathroom break, but Mrs. Henderson had already checked. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to their tents. Tommy's sleeping bag was cold, like he'd been gone for hours. Susan's stuff was all there, but she wasn't. "When did you last see them?" I asked. "Bed check at 10, Mr. Walsh said. He looked pale. They were both in their sleeping bags. I started searching around the campsite, looking for any sign of where they might have gone. That's when I found the footprints, small sneaker prints, leading away from camp and heading uphill toward the summit. "Kids," I called out. "Tommy, Susan, Nothing. Came back except my own echo. I radioed the ranger station and requested backup in a helicopter. Standard missing child protocol. While we waited, I followed the tracks with Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Walsh. The other teachers stayed with the remaining kids, trying to keep them calm. The tracks were clear in the soft dirt. 2 sets of small footprints walking side by side. Not running, not stumbling, just walking steadily uphill like they had somewhere specific to go. That bothered me more than if they'd been wandering randomly. About a quarter mile up the trail, Sarah Martinez, one of the other kids, grabbed my arm. "Mr. Jackson, I can hear them." I stopped. "Hear what, Sarah?" "Tommy and Susan, they're calling from way up there." She pointed toward the summit. I listened hard but heard only wind through the trees. "What are they saying?" "They sound happy, like they're playing." Mrs. Henderson shot me a worried look. Kids don't usually sound happy when they're lost in the woods. We kept following the tracks. The path got steeper and rockier, heading toward areas I'd marked off limits for the school group. These weren't places where 11-year-olds should be wandering, especially not in the dark. The helicopter arrived around 10 a.m., but the thick tree cover made it hard for them to see much. The pilot radioed that he'd spotted movement near the summit but couldn't get close enough to identify what it was. More rangers arrived, and we organized a proper search grid. I took the lead team up the main trail while others swept the sides. The tracks kept going up, never wavering, like Tommy and Susan knew exactly where they were headed. 2 hours later, we found something that made my stomach drop. There, arranged in a perfect circle on a flat rock, were Tommy's baseball cap, Susan's pink hair ribbon, and both their water bottles. Empty. "Why would they leave their water?" Mr. Walsh asked. Good question. Every kid I'd ever taught knew you never abandon your water in the wilderness. It was the first rule of survival. Above us, the wind picked up, and for just a second, I could swear I heard children's laughter echoing off the rocks, not frightened cries for help. Laughter. One of the other rangers, Pete Kowalski, found me at the rock circle. "Sam, there's something else you need to see." He led me about 50 yards uphill to a cluster of old trees. Carved into the bark of the largest oak were symbols I didn't recognize. Not recent carvings, they were weathered and grown over, probably decades old. "Cherokee?" Pete asked. I nodded, though I wasn't really sure. The symbols looked like stick figures holding hands around a circle. Below them was something that might have been a mountain or might have been something else entirely. "We need to call Joseph Ridge," I said. Pete raised an eyebrow. Ridge was a Cherokee elder who lived down in the valley. Most people thought he was a little crazy, always talking about old spirits and sacred places. "You really think—" A child's scream cut through the air, high and sharp, coming from somewhere above us. Then another scream, and another. But they weren't screams of fear. They were screams of delight. Joseph Ridge arrived that afternoon in his old pickup truck, moving with the careful steps of a man in his 70s. I'd met him a few times at community meetings, but we'd never really talked. He had long gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and wore a denim shirt with turquoise buttons. "You found children's things at the stone circle," he said. It wasn't a question. "Stone circle?" I asked. "We just found their stuff on a rock." Ridge smiled sadly. "Come, I'll show you what you really found." He led us further up the mountain, past where we'd stopped searching. The trees thinned out, and suddenly we were standing in a clearing I'd never seen before, even though I'd hiked this mountain dozens of times. 7 large stones stood in a perfect circle, each one about 4 feet tall. They weren't natural formations. Someone had placed them there, long ago. The stones were covered in moss and carved with symbols like the ones we'd found on the tree. "Cherokee children came here for vision quests," Ridge said quietly, "before your people arrived. This was a sacred place where young ones would meet their spirit guides." In the center of the circle, I saw more of Tommy and Susan's belongings. Tommy's lucky rabbit's foot keychain, Susan's friendship bracelet, a candy bar wrapper, all arranged in neat patterns like someone was setting up for a tea party. "Mr. Ridge," I said, 2 children are missing. Real children. This isn't about spirits or legends. His dark eyes met mine. Ranger Jackson. Some legends exist because they're true. Cherokee children died here during the removal. Soldiers came to take families west, but some children hid in the mountains. They died of cold and hunger, waiting for parents who would never come back. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The spirit children have been alone for a long time, Ridge continued. Sometimes they call to living children looking for playmates. Usually it's just dreams, voices on the wind. But sometimes what? Sometimes children answer. Mrs. Henderson had followed us up the trail with 3 of her students, kids who'd insisted they could hear Tommy and Susan calling. Now they stood at the edge of the stone circle, pointing excitedly. "There!" Sarah Martinez shouted. "I see them!" I looked where she was pointing but saw only empty space between the stones. "They're playing with other kids," said Marcus Webb, another 5th grader. "Lots of other kids. They look—" He frowned. "They look old-fashioned, like in pictures from a long time ago." Ridge nodded. "Living children see them more easily. Adult eyes have forgotten how to look." I wanted to dismiss it all as imagination and stress, but the evidence was right in front of me. Tommy and Susan's belongings, arranged by someone. Tracks that led here and then disappeared. And now, 3 different kids describing the same impossible scene. "How do we get them back?" I asked. Ridge pulled a small leather pouch from his shirt pocket. "Tobacco offering. Sacred smoke to carry messages between worlds. But first, you must understand what the spirit children want." "What do they want?" "Acknowledgement. For 140 years, no one has remembered the Cherokee children who died here. No one has honored their loss. They're lonely, Ranger Jackson. Loneliness can make spirits do desperate things." The sun was getting lower, and I was running out of time. If Tommy and Susan spent a night lost on this mountain, they might not survive, spirits or no spirits. "Tell me what to do." Ridge opened his tobacco pouch and began sprinkling the dark leaves around the stone circle. "We must smoke the sacred tobacco and call to the spirit children. Tell them their story is remembered. Ask them to release the living children out of compassion, not force. And if they refuse?" Ridge's expression was grim. "Then Tommy and Susan will join them forever. Lost children calling to new generations, century after century." As he lit the tobacco, sweet smoke began rising from several spots around the circle. The wind should have scattered it immediately, but instead the smoke formed thin columns that rose straight up into the darkening sky. That's when I heard them. Children's voices, speaking in a language I didn't understand. Cherokee, probably. But underneath the unfamiliar words, I could hear something else. Longing, sadness, a desperate need that had lasted far too long. And somewhere among those ancient voices, I heard Tommy Rodriguez calling my name. The tobacco smoke grew thicker, creating a gray haze around the stone circle. Through it, I began to see shapes, vague at first, then clearer. Children dressed in simple cloth clothing, their hair long and dark. They moved like they were dancing, holding hands, and spinning in slow circles. And there, right in the middle of the ghost children, were Tommy and Susan. They looked perfectly fine. No injuries, no fear on their faces. They were laughing and playing some kind of game with kids who'd been dead for over a century. Tommy saw me watching and waved like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Tommy!" I called out. "Susan, come here, please!" They started walking toward me, but it was like they were moving through thick water. Each step took tremendous effort, and the spirit children began pulling them back, not violently, but with the desperate grip of kids who'd been alone for too long. Ridge began speaking in Cherokee, his voice rising and falling like a song. I caught a few words I recognized. Children, mountain, peace. The spirit children stopped pulling and turned to listen. "What are you telling them?" I asked quietly. Their story. How soldiers came to remove their families. How children hid in the mountains and died waiting for parents who were forced to march west. how no one has spoken their names for 140 years. One of the spirit children, a girl about Susan's age, stepped forward from the circle. When she spoke, I somehow understood her words, even though she was speaking Cherokee. "We have been so lonely," she said. "The living children came to play with us. We do not want to hurt them, but we do not want to be alone anymore." Ridge translated my response. "I understand your loneliness, but these children have families waiting for them, parents who love them, just like your parents loved you." The spirit girl nodded sadly. "Our parents never came back." "Your parents didn't abandon you," I said, the words coming from somewhere deeper than my ranger training. "They were forced away at gunpoint. They died on the trail west, calling your names and trying to come home. They loved you until their last breath." Ridge's translation sparked something among the spirit children. They began talking rapidly to each other, gesturing toward Tommy and Susan, then toward the valley below, where their descendants still lived. "If we release the living children," the spirit girl asked, "will you remember us? Will you tell people what happened here?" I looked at Tommy and Susan, still caught between worlds, then at Mrs. Henderson and her students who were watching with wide eyes. This wasn't just about getting 2 kids back safely anymore. It was about honoring a tragedy that had been forgotten for too long. "Yes," I said firmly. "I promise. We'll remember you. We'll tell your story. Cherokee children will know about the ones who died waiting on Blood Mountain." The spirit children formed a tighter circle around Tommy and Susan, and for a terrifying moment I thought they'd decided to keep them after all. Then the ghost girl placed her hands on Tommy's shoulders and whispered something in his ear. She did the same with Susan. "Now, they will remember us too," she said. "When they grow up and have children of their own, they will tell the story of the Cherokee children who played with them on the mountain." The tobacco smoke suddenly swirled around Tommy and Susan like a gentle tornado. When it cleared, they were standing next to me, solid and real and looking confused. "Mr. Jackson," Tommy said, "did we fall asleep during the hike?" Susan blinked at the stone circle. "I had the strangest dream. There were kids here, and they taught us games from a long time ago. They were so sad, but they tried to be happy for us." I looked back at the stones, but the spirit children were gone. Only wisps of tobacco smoke remained, drifting up toward the stars that were just beginning to appear. Ridge placed a weathered hand on my shoulder. "They are at peace now. The living children carry their memory forward." We got Tommy and Susan back to camp as the last light faded from the sky. They seemed perfectly normal. Tired, a little confused about losing time, but yarmed. The other kids peppered them with questions about where they'd been, but Tommy and Susan just said they remembered playing with some children who knew really old games. Mrs. Henderson wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but I convinced her to stay the night. "They're safe now," I said, "and they learned something important up there." I was right. Over the next 2 days, Tommy and Susan became fascinated with Cherokee history. They asked Joseph Ridge dozens of questions about what life was like before European settlement, how families lived, what games children played. Ridge seemed happy to share the stories, like he'd been waiting years for someone to ask. When we finally hiked down to the buses, I made a detour past the stone circle with the whole group. In daylight, with all the kids there, it looked like just another mountain clearing. But now I knew better. "This is where Cherokee children used to come for vision quests," I told the class. "Some of them died here during the forced removal in the 1830s, waiting for parents who couldn't come back. Their spirits watched over this mountain for almost 150 years. Sarah Martinez raised her hand. "Are they still here?" I thought about the promise I'd made. In a way, their story is part of this place. When you remember what happened here, they're remembered too. After the school group left, I spent a lot of time researching Cherokee history and the Trail of Tears. I learned about the children who died during the removal, some on the 1,000-mile forced march, others who hid in the mountains and never found their families again. I started incorporating real Cherokee history into all my educational programs. Joseph Ridge became a regular part of the Blood Mountain trips. He'd meet school groups at the Stone Circle and tell them about Cherokee culture, including the tragedy of removal. The kids always listened with respect, especially after I'd tell them about Tommy and Susan's experience. 6 months later, the Forest Service officially documented the Stone Circle as a Cherokee cultural site. They put up a small plaque that read, "Sacred Site where Cherokee children came for vision quests, in memory of all Cherokee children lost during the removal of 1838 to 1839. Tommy Rodriguez grew up to become a teacher himself, specializing in Native American history. Susan Baker became a social worker, helping kids in foster care. Both of them credited their night on Blood Mountain with teaching them about loss, memory, and the importance of honoring the forgotten. I still lead groups up Blood Mountain, but I always make time for the Stone Circle now. Sometimes, especially when Cherokee kids are in the group, I catch glimpses of movement between the stones, shadows that wave before disappearing, children's laughter carried on the wind. But it doesn't feel scary anymore. It feels peaceful. The spirit children aren't lonely now. They're remembered. Their story lives on in every kid who learns about what happened here, in every adult who understands that Cherokee families love their children just as fiercely as any parents today. Mountain legends aren't just stories to make camping more exciting. Sometimes they're truths waiting for someone brave enough to listen. And sometimes when you honor the past with respect and compassion, the spirits can finally rest. But Blood Mountain hasn't forgotten. On quiet nights, when the wind moves through the trees just right, you can still hear children playing ancient games between the stones, not calling for help anymore, not trying to steal the living away from their families, just playing, just remembered, just at peace. The Cherokee children of Blood Mountain aren't lost anymore. They're home. My name is Joseph Kowalski, but everyone calls me Cole Joe. I know it sounds weird for a forest ranger, but that's my story. My dad spent 30 years digging coal out of these West Virginia mountains, and his dad before him. I was supposed to follow them down into the dark, but I couldn't do it. Instead, I became the first Kowalski to work above ground, trying to fix what the mines broke. November 1979 was cold and wet. The first snow came early that year, covering the old strip mine sites like a white blanket, trying to hide ugly scars. I'd been working for the Forest Service for 6 years, and my job was simple: figure out how to make dead land green again. The mining companies had torn up thousands of acres, then left when the coal ran out. Now it was my job to bring the forest back. That morning I was driving my green Forest Service truck through the Monongahela National Forest, heading to the old Beckley mine site. The EPA had sent a team of scientists there 2 weeks ago to test the water and soil. They were supposed to document how bad the damage was from decades of coal mining, but 3 days ago they stopped calling in their daily reports. My radio crackled. "Cole Joe, this is Helen." That was Ranger Helen Briggs, my partner for this search. She'd been working these mountains for 15 years, knew every trail and every family. "Go ahead, Helen." "I'm at the mine entrance. You need to see this." When I got there, Helen was standing next to the EPA team's white van. The doors were open, and papers were scattered all over the ground. Expensive testing equipment lay broken in the mud. But no people. "Looks like they left in a hurry," Helen said. She was a tough woman in her 40s, with gray streaks in her brown hair and hands that knew hard work. Her family had lived in these mountains for generations, most of them miners. I picked up one of the scattered papers. It was a water test from the flooded mine pit. The numbers didn't make sense. Pollution levels that should have been impossible. "Did they call for help on the radio?" "That's the strange part," Helen said. "Last transmission was Tuesday morning, real calm, just their routine check-in. Then nothing." I looked at the mine entrance. It was just a dark hole in the mountainside, surrounded by rusty equipment and warning signs. Water trickled out constantly, orange-colored from iron and chemicals. The smell hit you from 50 yards away, like rotten eggs mixed with metal. "We need to go down there," I said, even though every safety rule said not to enter flooded mines. Helen nodded, but her face looked worried. Joe, my family's been in these mountains a long time. My grandfather worked these mines, my father too. They used to say—" She stopped and shook her head. "Never mind. Old stories." "What kind of stories?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at the dark mine entrance. "They said sometimes miners who died in accidents never really left, that they kept working, trying to finish what they started. But that's just talk, right? Old-timers telling scary stories. I'd heard similar things before. Carbon monoxide poisoning could make people see and hear things that weren't there. Desperate families sometimes imagined their dead relatives were still around. It was psychology, not ghosts." "Right," I said. "Just stories." But as we gathered our gear, flashlights, rope, first aid kit, gas detector, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Even in late fall, you should hear some wildlife. It was like every living thing had decided to stay away from this place. We put on our helmets and checked our lights. The gas detector showed normal air quality outside the mine. Helen led the way because, she knew these old mining tunnels better than I did. "Beckley Mine was shut down in 1962, she explained as we walked toward the entrance. "Methane explosion killed 23 men. They sealed most of the tunnels, but the main shaft is still open for drainage. The water at the entrance was ankle deep and warm. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness ahead, showing rough-cut stone walls and rusty support beams. The tunnel went straight back into the mountain for about 100 yards, then split into 3 directions. EPA team would have gone left, Helen said. That's where the worst water damage is." As we moved deeper, our footsteps echoed strangely. The sound bounced off the walls and seemed to come back different, like other footsteps walking somewhere else in the tunnels. I told myself it was just echoes, but Helen looked nervous too. Then we heard something that made us both stop dead. From somewhere deep in the mine came the sound of metal hitting stone. Regular, rhythmic, like someone swinging a pickaxe. "That can't be right," I whispered, but the sound continued. Clang, clang, clang. Someone was definitely mining down there. Helen grabbed my arm. "Joe, nobody works these mines anymore. They've been sealed for 17 years. We stood still, listening. The pickaxe sounds came from the left tunnel, the same direction the EPA team would have gone. Mixed with the rhythmic clanging, I thought I heard voices, men calling out to each other, but too distant to understand the words. "Could be kids," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Or maybe someone scavenging equipment. In flooded tunnels with poison gas?" Helen shook her head. "We should call for backup." But our radio only made static when we tried to call out. The mine walls blocked the signal. We had a choice: go back and get help, losing more time, or continue the search. 4 EPA scientists were missing, possibly hurt. Every hour counted. We stick together, I decided. But if anything feels wrong, we get out fast. The left tunnel sloped downward and the water got deeper, up to our knees, then our waists. Our flashlights reflected off the black water, creating dancing patterns on the walls. The pickaxe sounds got louder as we went deeper. Then Helen stopped so suddenly I bumped into her. "Look," she whispered, pointing ahead. In the distance, maybe 50 yards down the tunnel, we could see lights. Not electric lights, the warm yellow glow of old mining lamps. They were moving, bobbing up and down like people walking. "Hello," I called out. "EPA team, is that you?" The lights stopped moving. The pickaxe sounds stopped too. For a moment, everything was silent except the drip of water from the ceiling. Then we heard a voice call back, echoing off the tunnel walls. "Who's there? We're still working. The seam's not finished." Helen's hand found my arm again, gripping tight. "Joe," she whispered, "that voice. It sounded like my father." "Your father's been dead for years," I said, but my own voice shook. The lights started moving again, coming toward us. As they got closer, I could see they were definitely the old-style mining helmets with carbide lamps. But something was wrong with how they moved. too smooth, like they were floating instead of walking through knee-deep water. "We need to go," Helen said. "Now." But before we could turn around, we saw something that made my blood freeze. One of the mining lights illuminated a face underneath it. The man looked like he was in his 40s, with coal dust covering his features and old-fashioned work clothes, but his skin was gray-white, like someone who'd been underwater for a long time. "Helen Marie Briggs," the figure called out. "Little Helen Marie, your daddy's been waiting for you." Helen made a sound like a sob. "That is my father, but he died in the explosion 17 years ago." More lights appeared behind the first one. I counted at least a dozen men, all wearing the same old mining gear, all with that same gray-white skin. They stood in the water like it was solid ground, not moving with the current at all. "The seam's not finished," another voice said. "Been working all these years, but we can't complete the job. Need help. Need the living to help us." My gas detector started beeping. The readings were impossible. It showed methane levels that should have killed us instantly, but I could breathe just fine. The device was going crazy, like it was trying to measure something that didn't exist. "Where's the EPA team?" I shouted, trying to sound official and in control. One of the figures pointed deeper into the mine. "They're helping now. Come see. Come help finish the work." The lights started moving toward us again. I grabbed Helen's hand and pulled her backward. But the water seemed thicker now, harder to move through. Our flashlight beams flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw the men more clearly. Their faces were sunken, their eyes dark holes, their clothes torn and burned. "Run!" Helen gasped. We turned and fought our way back through the water, but it felt like we were moving in slow motion. Behind us, the mining lights followed, and I could hear voices calling, "Don't leave! The work's not done! Been waiting so long!" My foot caught on something underwater and I stumbled. When I looked down with my flashlight, I saw what had tripped me. A modern EPA testing kit, the kind the missing scientists would have carried. But there was something else. Carved into the tunnel wall, someone had scratched a message in fresh letters. "Help us. Day 3. They won't let us leave. The miners are still here." Helen saw it too. "The EPA team," she whispered. "They're still alive." The mining lights were getting closer. In their glow, I could see the water around us starting to change color, turning from black to a sick, glowing green. The smell got worse, like rotting meat and sulfur. "We have to help them," I said. But even as I spoke, I knew we were in over our heads. The voices behind us got louder, more urgent. "The mount. Ain's hungry. Feed the mountain. Finish the work." We made it back to the main tunnel, but the mine entrance looked different now. The opening that should have shown daylight was dark, like someone had covered it with a black curtain. Our way out was gone. "This isn't possible," I said, but Helen was looking at something else. All around us, the old mining equipment was moving. Rusty conveyor belts creaked to life. A drilling machine that should have been broken for decades started spinning its bit. The whole mine was waking up. "They never stopped working," Helen said, her voice barely above a whisper. 17 years, and they never stopped. From the right tunnel came new sounds, voices calling for help, but in modern accents. The EPA team. "This way," I heard someone shout. "Help us! We're trapped!" Helen and I looked at each other. We had to try, even if it meant going deeper into whatever hell this place had become. The right tunnel was different from the left. The walls were covered with fresh tool marks, like someone had been digging recently. Mining carts full of coal sat on tracks that shouldn't have worked anymore. Everything was too clean, too new. "Hello?" I called out. "EPA team, where are you?" "Down here," came the reply. "Bottom level. But be careful. They won't let us stop working." We followed the voices deeper. The tunnel opened into a large underground chamber, and what I saw there will haunt me forever. 4 people in EPA jackets sat in mining carts, but they weren't moving. They were positioned like they were still taking samples, still testing the water, but their eyes stared straight ahead without blinking. Their hands moved mechanically, scooping water into test tubes over and over. but the tubes were full of that same glowing green liquid. "Dr. Peterson?" I called to the nearest one, a woman in her 30s. She turned her head toward me, and I saw her face was the same gray-white color as the dead miners. "Can't stop working," she said in a flat voice. "The mountain needs us to finish the tests. Been working for days. So, tired, but can't stop." Behind them stood the ghostly miners watching, making sure they kept working. "You see," said the voice that Helen thought was her father. "The living help better, stronger hands, fresh energy. But they get tired, so we need more." I understood then. The miners had been trapped here since 1962, trying to finish a job they could never complete. They needed living people to help them, but working with the dead was slowly killing the EPA team. "Let them go," I demanded. "They've done enough." "No," said another miner. "The coal seam runs deeper. Must dig deeper. Mountain's hungry, been hungry for 17 years. Helen stepped forward. "Daddy, is it really you?" The figure turned to look at her. Up close, I could see the family resemblance, even through the death-gray skin. "My little girl. Knew you'd come back to the mountain eventually. Briggs' family belongs here." "You died, Daddy, the explosion." "Died working. Still working. Always working." He gestured around the chamber. "Look what we've done. Coal enough to last forever, but need living hands to finish." The green glow in the water was getting brighter. I realized it wasn't just pollution. It was some kind of supernatural energy, maybe the life force being drained from the EPA team. They were dying a little more each minute they worked. "We can help," I said, trying to buy time. "But first let the EPA people rest. They're too weak to work properly." The miners considered this. "You'll take their place?" "Yes." The word came out before I could stop it. Helen stared at me. "Joe, no." But I had a plan. My gas detector was still reading impossible levels of methane. If the readings were right, one spark could blow up this whole section of the mine. The dead miners might survive an explosion, but it would free the living. I just needed to get close enough to create that spark. "Show us what needs to be done," I said. The miners gestured to a wall of coal at the far end of the chamber. "CM goes deeper. Must follow it. Dig it all out." I walked toward the wall, Helen following reluctantly. The EPA team continued their mechanical movements, trapped in their deadly work. Up close, I could see Dr. Peterson's lips were blue, her breathing shallow. "Helen," I whispered, "when I say run, get those EPA people out of here." "What are you planning?" I showed her the gas detector reading. Her eyes went wide. "The whole place could blow," she whispered. "Better than letting them drain the life out of everyone who comes here." I reached the coal wall and pretended to examine it. The miners crowded around, eager to see living hands start the work. Their presence made the air so cold I could see my breath. "Need tools," I said. "Where are the pickaxes?" One of the miners handed me an old tool, its metal head covered in rust and something darker. As soon as I touched it, I felt a chill run up my arms. The tool was supernaturally cold and seemed to pulse with its own life. "Now dig," the miner said. "Feed the mountain." I raised the pickaxe, aimed carefully, and brought it down hard on the coal wall. But instead of digging, I struck the metal tool against stone, creating a shower of sparks. The methane ignited instantly. The explosion lit up the mine like day. I was thrown backward by the blast, my ears ringing, vision blurred. But I was alive, and the supernatural miners were screaming, not in pain, but in rage. "You've ruined everything!" Helen's father shrieked. 17 years of work!" Helen had grabbed Dr. Peterson and was dragging her toward the tunnel. The other EPA team members were shaking their heads, confused but alive. The explosion had broken whatever spell kept them working, but the miners weren't giving up. The blast had damaged their physical forms, what made them angrier. They surrounded us, their mining lamps blazing brighter than before. "No one leaves until the work is finished," one of them roared. The mine itself seemed to be fighting back. Rocks fell from the ceiling. Water poured in faster, rising to our chests. The tunnel we'd entered through was blocked by fallen stones. "There's another way," Helen called out. "Old emergency exit, but it's through the main coal seam." She led us through a narrow passage I hadn't seen before. The EPA team stumbled along behind us, still weak but desperate to escape. The dead miners followed, their voices echoing through the tunnels. "Come back! Finish the work!" The emergency exit was up a steep, narrow shaft with an old wooden ladder. But at the bottom of the shaft was the heart of the mine, a huge chamber filled with coal that had never been dug out, the mother lode that the miners had died trying to reach. And in that chamber, something waited for us. It wasn't human. It was huge, made of coal and rock and metal, with eyes like mining lamps and a mouth full of rusted tools. The mountain itself had come alive, fed by decades of death and desperation. "The mountain's hunger," Helen whispered. The old stories were true. The creature spoke with the voices of every miner who had ever died in these tunnels. "Feed me. Bring me workers. Bring me life." I understood then. The dead miners weren't the real enemy. They were just servants. This thing, this living mountain, was what kept them working. It fed on human effort, human life, growing stronger with each person who died trying to serve it. "You want workers?" I shouted up at the creature. "Then let's finish this properly." I grabbed a bundle of old mining explosives from the wall, dynamite left over from the 1962 operation. The sticks were old and unstable, but they might still work. "Joe, no!" Helen screamed. "You'll bring down the whole mine." "That's the idea." I lit the fuse with my lighter. "Everyone up the ladder, now." The EPA team didn't need encouragement. They started climbing as fast as I could. Helen hesitated, looking back at her father's ghost. "Daddy, come with us. You don't have to stay here anymore." The figure that had been her father looked up at the mountain's hunger, then back at his daughter. For a moment, his gray face showed something like love. "Can't leave, little girl. Mountain won't let us, but maybe." He turned to the other miners. "Boys, we've been working for 17 years. Maybe it's time we went on strike." The dead miners looked at each other, then at their supernatural master. Slowly, they began to nod. "We're done," Helen's father called up to the creature. "No more work. No more feeding you. We're going to rest." The mountain's hunger roared with rage. The whole mine shook. Rocks fell like rain. But the miners stood firm, united for the first time since their death. Helen started up the ladder. I was right behind her, clutching the lit dynamite. Below us, the creature thrashed and screamed, trying to force its servants back to work. But they wouldn't move. "Sleep now, Daddy," Helen called down. "Sleep now, little girl," he replied. And for just a moment, he looked human again. The dynamite exploded just as we reached the surface. The whole mountainside shook. Trees fell. The mine entrance collapsed completely, sealing whatever was left down there forever. Helen and I threw ourselves flat as rocks and debris rained down around us. When the dust settled, we could hear sirens in the distance. Someone had seen the explosion and called for help. The 4 EPA scientists were alive but in bad shape, dehydrated, exhausted, with gaps in their memory about what had happened underground. "Gas leak," Dr. Peterson mumbled as the paramedics loaded her into an ambulance. "Must have been a gas leak. Made us hallucinate." That became the official story. Methane buildup in the sealed mine had caused hallucinations and disorientation. The explosion was blamed on the EPA team accidentally igniting the gas. The scientists' memory problems were explained as trauma from the experience. Nobody talked about the dead miners or the mountain's hunger. Who would believe such a story? But Helen and I knew the truth. We'd sealed something evil, maybe forever. The dead miners had finally found peace by refusing to serve their supernatural master. Helen's father and his friends had chosen rest over endless work. I stayed with the Forest Service, continuing the land reclamation project. Over the years, I've planted thousands of trees on the old strip mine sites. Grass grows now where there used to be only poisoned dirt. The forest is healing. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I think I can hear voices in the wind, miners' voices, but peaceful now. They're not calling for help or demanding more work. They're just talking to each other, the way living men do after a long day's labor is finally done. Helen retired early and moved to town. She visits her father's grave regularly now, something she couldn't do before. She says she sleeps better, knowing he's truly at rest. The Beckley mine site is permanently sealed and marked as environmentally hazardous. Trees are growing over the entrance. In a few more years, you won't even be able to tell there was ever a mine there. But sometimes, late at night when I'm doing paperwork in my ranger station, I get reports of strange sounds from other abandoned mine sites. The sound of pickaxes, the sound of men working. I always investigate these reports myself, because I know that the mountain's hunger wasn't unique. These old mountains are full of places where men died for coal, where desperation and death created something that doesn't belong in the world of the living. And sometimes, those places need a ranger who understands that not all environmental hazards can be cleaned up with new soil and tree seedlings. Sometimes, you need to fight fire with fire, and darkness with a bigger darkness. My name is Joseph Kowalski, but everyone calls me Coal Joe, and I'm still working these mountains, trying to put right what was made wrong. The work's never finished, but at least now, I'm doing it for the living.